I'm Plastician and I'm here with DaMetalMessiah and we are going to be talking all sorts. My musical upbringing was probably it's not that exciting, like people have like all these stories of their parents being like classically trained or in a band or, like jazz musicians. I didn't have any of that. I come from a pretty normal background. Dad's a carpenter, mum worked jobs here and there to kind of like make ends meet. So like my introduction to music really was just I was obviously interested in music as everyone is as they're growing up, and I think that when my sort of first exposure to any kind of like real live music was a friend of mine's dad used to work for a company called the Workers Beer Company, and they used to put festivals on, do the beer tents festivals in like Finsbury Park in London. So when I was around 14, I was really into like Jamiroquai. That was my band, and we got to go watch them perform at Finsbury Park. Had backstage tickets, got to meet JK and the band, and that was some of my first exposure to like live music. And then I think as I got a little bit older, sort of towards the end of my sort of time at secondary school, when I was sort of 15, 16, that's when people in my year, who particularly kids who had like older siblings, they were bringing like jungle tapes into school. It was like jungle was like the cool thing that everyone was getting into, and I just couldn't really get my head into it that much. I don't know what it was at the time. Maybe just like my taste buds were not quite acquired to that, like the snare rolls and stuff like that. I was just like, what's going on here? And it wasn't till I left secondary school and started college, so like 16, 17 that summer, and going into college and doing sort of my coursework, I would turn the radio on. And I think maybe towards the tail end of like school, I started to get into a little bit into like breaks and stuff like that. I kind of found that I had a Ministry of Sound CD, I think like the Future Sounds of the UK Volume 2, which was like, it kind of went from sort of like trip hop to like breaks to, it did have like jungle and like, I guess like really early, like Moving Shadow style, like early like jump up DMB, I guess. So I kind of had like an ear for it, and I knew I didn't really like jungle, but then when I started hearing garage on the radio, I quite liked that. And through listening to pirate radio, doing my coursework in college, that's when my ear started to get a little bit more accustomed to garage sound, and I would sit and record like a cassette off a radio station, usually like Delight FM or Flight FM in South London, Desire, Up Front. They were the kind of main pirate stations that I could actually get in my house in Thornton Heath in Croydon. And yeah, I used to record sets off that and just listen to them all day long while I was at college doing coursework. And then I'd meet other people that had a similar taste in music, and then I think getting introduced to the tape packs of the actual like live gigs. One in particular was the Exposure, I think it was Volume 2, EZ and PSG, and when I heard that, that's when I was like, wow, I'd never heard a DJ mix like that before. It was like high impact, it was exciting, the MC kind of worked with the DJ, landing on the drops. I was like, this is what I want to do, I'd love to. So I had a mate in college who had a set of decks. We'd have like a double break, I think a couple of times a week. We'd go to his house and he'd have the belt drive Sound Lab set up, but he was like so protective of them that like we kind of end up just sitting there watching him, and I'll be like, I want to have a go. The minute I start having a go, he's like, no, do it like this, you got to do it like this, and I'm like, all right, I'm not actually getting hands on with it. And then I think when he turned 18, he decided he wanted to sell his decks to like buy a Cubase and a computer and learn to make music. So I bought his decks off of him, and that was it. So I was like 17, I think like I was about to turn 18. I had like talked my parents into buying these decks for me for my birthday, and they thought it was a phase. They were like, oh yeah, it'd be like when you got into roller skating and all that. It only lasted a few months, and I didn't ever kind of get into it with the intention of like it becoming, it did feel like a hobby to me. So yeah, I was just sort of like bought the decks, started buying vinyl in Big Apple and Swag Records in Croydon, and yeah, the rest is history really. That was kind of my introduction to music. Kind of fell into it. It wasn't like I wasn't nurtured into it. It just kind of happened. I would say on pirate radio at the time, I didn't really know a lot about who I was listening to. Sometimes it could literally be anything. It would just be like whatever was on that, the signal was good enough to record. So I remember listening to a DJ called Goodfella. I think he was on Upfront or Flight. Obviously, So Solid was a big one in South London. So Solid Sundays on Delight FM would be like So Solid Crew, Dan the Man, Milky Man's, yeah, like pretty much that kind of vibe. Scott Garcia, I'm pretty sure, was on Delight around them times as well. And then as I was a little bit further down the line, that's when I got to know like N-Type and Walsh. They had a show on Delight, and obviously Hatcher was on, I think, Flight FM at the time. So that, meeting people in the record shop who were involved in radio. So then when you meet someone in the shop, be like, oh, that guy's on radio. What time is he on? Like, I'll tune into that. See, I remember Goodfella was one of those, and Hatcher, and obviously N-Type and Walsh. I think that was probably, yeah, that was the main crux of it. I didn't have any sort of like go-to shows. I think So Solid Sunday was a big one in the area where what I could pick up. Obviously, like, we found out about Rinse a little bit further down the line, and that was through the tape packs, like when Slimzee pops up on Sidewinder and stuff like that. And that's when it was like, right, I need to try and figure out how to tune into Rinse. And I think I had to sort of sit there with a certain, holding the aerial up like in a certain position. I could literally sit there, and I would like sit there and listen to Slimzee on a Sunday, record his show for 2 hours, and then try and figure out what the hell he'd been playing, because it was all unreleased music. But that almost became like your shopping list. Whatever he's playing, when the minute you hear that in the record shop, you're picking it up. And it was like that before with like, like I was talking about pirate radio, but these days we had Dream Team on Radio 1 and EZ on Kiss. So similar with those as well. If they were getting played on the radio, then when you went into the record shop, you hear it, you'd be like, probably going to need to pick that one up. You might need that for your show. Or obviously then, this was before I got onto radio myself, but eventually, yeah, I was doing the South London Pirates myself. I think my first one was Desire FM, which was it only popped up every sort of few months in Wallington. It was in this kid's like mum and dad's house in the front room. I don't think she had a clue what was going on. We were broadcasting there, so the aerial wasn't particularly high, so the reach was like not very far. But that was my first taste of pirate radio. And then I went on to 2GFM with a mate of mine, DJ Abel, who was also on Rinse for a long time. He got me a show on there, and that was in Deptford on a tower block. And that was my first like proper pirate radio experience, going on there and yeah, playing my tunes and kind of learning to ply my trade on radio as a DJ myself.
So when you were starting this, are you playing garage?
Yeah, when I started out, I was playing garage. And yeah, I see like the first sort of radio shows were garage, but I did used to go on the radio with MCs. So it was like a bit like that So Solid kind of garage era where we were playing like the first hour be like club garage, like girly kind of radio crossover stuff. And in the second hour we played darker two-step instrumentals, and the MCs would like spit on that.
This is Fearless Crew.
Yeah, Fearless Crew, exactly, yeah. It's Trick, Spells and Kid.
And what was your name at that point?
Dark Star. That was me, yeah, on the radio. Not the Dark Star that released music later on.
What kind of garage was you, like any particular artist that you were always picking up?
I used to love, so I guess in those times in like pirate radio days, it would have been stuff like the Harry Lime releases, anything a bit breakbeaty, live wire, like Devastate, tracks like that. A lot of stuff that I didn't know was artwork at the time, but turned out to be him, like further down the line, where I'm like, oh, you did that? Wow, he's got so many aliases that I didn't know were him. So I definitely have to say artwork in many of his various guises. And then you've got the classics, like LB, Steve Gurley, Groove Chronicles, classic stuff like that. That was the crux of like my taste. And obviously DJ Zinc, when Zinc came through with like 138 Trek, Sticky, of course, Social Circles, anything on Social Circles or Bingo was like, you have to buy that. So that was a big part of sets back then. And yeah, I think Sticky particularly, actually, he was a favourite of the MCs I was working with, firstly in Fearless Crew, and then anyone else that was kind of in the local area that I met through doing radio and stuff like that. That was the backbone of the selections back then, I think.
So obviously you were based in Croydon. What was the nightlife like back then?
The nightlife in Croydon back then was really like quite vivid, actually. If you compare it to what it's now, like we've only kind of got now like Box Park and a few pubs. Don't really have any real late night venues. But back then, in the sort of like turn of the century, early 2000s, there were literally dozens of nightclubs and bars and pubs. You know, you used to have to queue to get into Wetherspoons in Croydon back then. It was so busy. I'm not exaggerating when I say there's probably 20 to 30,000 people out in Croydon on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday every week. You know, we had the Blue Orchid was like a big, I think 3,000 cap, I want to say, and they had like 3 rooms. And on a Friday and Saturday, the main room would usually book a headline DJ. On an average one, maybe they wouldn't, but like, you know, at least once or twice a month you get a Matt Jam Lamont or an EZ or something like that, or, you know, like Garage Nation might do a night there, or Exposure might do a night there. So we got the garage promoters in Croydon in Blue Orchid, which meant when they weren't running, even your kind of resident DJs were playing garage vinyl and then a bit of drum and bass at the end of the night, and then the other room would be like 80s cheese room, R&B downstairs kind of thing. So that was the main big club in the town. And then you had, it's hard to remember the names of often, but we had like a big walkabout, which was obviously a bit of a cheesier kind of affair. We had Coliseum, I want to call it, down the way, and that again was like garage promotions a lot of the time. Used to be a little bit more trouble at that one, so that like got closed and renamed a bunch of times, just why I can't remember what it was called half the time. But then we had Joe Bananas, which then turned into Club 1921, which is where I started cutting my teeth as a promoter. But we had loads, honestly. Like the list, I could be here all day. I could list 50 odd bars. There was so many. Some of them were small. A lot of them, you know, might only have been 100 cap, more of a bar, but nearly all of them would have had live DJ in them, and a lot of them it would have been like garage music, because that was, as much as it wasn't on like mainstream radio so much, it was like the common music that, like, a lot of my friends that I grew up with who were not DJs all know all of that music from that time as well. It was just, if you went out, that was what you were listening to. That was what everyone was listening to in Croydon.
I guess musically Croydon was mostly famous for Big Apple. Were you shopping there straight away when you were a DJ?
So my experience initially at Big Apple was, it was really intimidating, because you go in there and you don't really know what you're doing, as most people who don't buy records. Maybe now it's different because you can kind of go in and do a bit of crate digging, but in Big Apple, the crates were kind of like behind you, and then but the majority of the new stuff was behind John and Hatcher and whoever, like Jack, whoever's working in the shop that day. So you kind of had to look and ask what it was. If you knew what you were going in there to get, you'd just be like, I want Agent X, I want Sticky, I want Zinc, and they'll kind of put a pile together for you, and then they'll either kind of just play it in the house system for you to go like yes or no. Then, as you got to know them a little bit better, they might send you upstairs with like a cartridge, and then upstairs there was like a little room that had about 8 kind of listening booths in it, and you could sit there, put the needle on with your pile of records, go through it in the headphones, come downstairs and pay for the ones that you want and give back the ones you didn't. But then there was another level up from that. Once you like really got comfortable with them, there was like a little room where they'd let you smoke in there. I wasn't a smoker, but people would sit in there smoking for hours. You could go up there, you had like speakers in there, you'd sit on a couch similar to this, and just put the records on and sit in there and like, have a listen of them properly. So like when you got that, you felt like you were kind of like a preferred customer. You were like part of the family. So that was special for anyone that got given that key. You knew you had like been accepted into the family, so to speak. But yeah, I think before I got to that, I remember my first experience walking into Big Apple. I was with my mate from college, and this was about the same time that I started, like, it was before I bought my first set of decks, but it was coming up to that time. And we walked in there, and we just went to walk straight upstairs. We sort of looked around, we're like, and John's gone, where are you going? We were like, upstairs. And he went, well, you're going to need some records first. We didn't know what was up there. We thought there'd be more records or whatever. So he come downstairs, and my mate's like trying not to laugh because we were like school kids that got caught like trying to sneak out or something. And then he's gone, what do you want to listen to? And I was like, oh, just like garage, like new, whatever you've got. And he kind of picked a few records off, and then he just started playing them in the shop. And my mate's there trying not. He's like, we're getting mugged off here. Like, we thought we were going to get a pile of records to go upstairs, and John had other ideas. So I think it was probably a few months after that of going to like Swag Records in West Croydon, where it was a little bit more. Everyone was kind of like, all of the listening booths were kind of embedded in the sort of front desk, so you didn't have that kind of upstairs downstairs. It was pretty obvious where you go to listen. They didn't have quite as many exclusives when it came to like the garage stuff as Apple though, so I knew I had to get back there once I kind of knew what I was doing. So yeah, I probably spent a month or two in Swag, plucked the courage back up to go into Apple, and then after that, yeah, I was more become a bit part of the furniture there. I had a job in a bar, a full-time job. My first full-time job was in a bar in Croydon, and we used to do double shifts on Fridays and Saturdays. So on any given Friday, Saturday, I'd have a 2-hour lunch break, and I'd go to Apple and spend 2 hours there, just kind of hanging out. And that's how I ended up meeting a lot of the other Croydon like producers and DJs.
So you didn't know many of them before Big Apple?
I kind of knew some of the people that were in there before. Like, we had weird kind of connections to people. Croydon's like, as big as it is a town, it's got like quite a close-knit community where we're all linked. So like Mala, for example, Mala was an MC, as was Koki. They were MCs on the garage circuit, so I kind of knew of them as MCs. But I also played football with Mala's twin brothers, Dean and Darren, when I was growing up, so I knew his brothers. I didn't know Skream or Benga or N-Type or Walsh. I met N-Type in the shop, I think, when I came in to sort of I knew Hatcher, actually. I went to school with Hatcher. Hatcher was in the year above me at school, so we went to the same school together, as did Easy Rider. He was in the same year as Hatcher. But yeah, the rest of them I kind of met either like in and around the record shop, or later on we kind of like, I went to college with Loafer, so I met Loafer in college before I knew him as Loafer. He was like in the year above me, so we were both doing like art at A level, and yeah, so I knew of him. I think Pokes might have gone to the same college as well, but I didn't meet him until a bit later on. But yeah, I mean, like, my mum worked with Mala at Vodafone. Like, that was another weird connection. But so yeah, there's all these like weird little connections. But in terms of actually really knowing them, I'd say that when I first started shopping in Big Apple, apart from Hatcher, who I knew from school, he recognised me when I went in the shop. I didn't know many of the others.
Musically, what did Big Apple mean to you in like your development?
I think musically for me, it was that meeting the DJs who were on the radio, and I was so desperate to, like, I really wanted to get on the radio. Once I knew I could mix, I was like, I knew I was good enough to get on the radio, but I just didn't really know how. My friend Abel, he kind of opened a few doors. We were doing internet radio together, UK Garage FM, I think it was called, and we used to broadcast through like Shoutcast on his computer. So we didn't actually need to leave his house to broadcast on that, and people used to kind of like dial in from wherever they were DJing. They had a slot, you dialed in, did your slot, and then hung up basically. And he got me on 2GFM, so that was my first pirate. But I knew that I wanted to step up from that, because I could tell, even though I hadn't really had much experience of being anywhere else, I think Hatcher took me and Benny Hill and a few people to Flight FM one night. So I'd seen that and saw how much busier like the phone line was, and I was like, wow, this is way better than what my radio stations have been like up to this point. So I aspired to do better. So being in Big Apple and being around people who were on those stations and meeting them and making those connections felt really important. It was like, you want to meet these people, do a bit of networking with them, and then it's like, there's only so much you can kind of offer yourself as a DJ. They're like, oh, there's everyone who comes in the shop's a DJ, but not everyone's a producer. And it became apparent to me that, seeing how people like Skream and I guess even Benga to a certain extent. I didn't see Benga as much in the shop as I saw Skream. Skream would come in the shop and kind of play like a mini disc or CD of stuff he'd been working on, and Hatcher would be like critiquing it. And then some of it would end up on his show. He'd go and cut a dub plate. And that was fascinating to me. I was like, well, that's how maybe I need to start making beats, but I couldn't get my head around it for a long time, just trying to figure it out myself, making pretty bad beats out of like samples ripped off of like Super Mario and stuff like that. But I didn't really like have any joy with Hatcher in that respect with my early stuff. But that was it. It was like Big Apple was the door. It was like you're at the doorstep. Like you've got their ear now. Like, what do you want? And what I wanted was, I want to be on the radio. What do I need to do? And there was only so much, like they can do for a DJ. But if you've got some kind of, that's where I realised, like, I need people to hear me. I need to maybe make beats or whatever. And I was struggling for a while until like the grime sound kind of kicked in. Tunes like Pulse X. When I heard that, I was like, I could probably make something like that. But obviously, it was a strange art to like perfect that 8-bar sound without making it sound too cheap. Which, like Pulse X was the most simple track ever, but it did bang. It's like, how can I make something that hits like that? Then maybe I'll get my foot in the door. And that was it. It took me a little while to like get my foot in the door. And it's funny because initially it wasn't even Hatcher, but like N-Type in the shop was like, did you make this? And I was like, yeah. And he said, oh, take my number. Can I get a CD? And Hatcher I was like, oh, you can have that one. But he's not interested in those beats. So, and he went to the radio that day. So I remember meeting him that day and driving home to sit in my house because he was going to be on Delight FM about 3 hours later. So I was literally sat there and he played like 2 of my tracks on the radio. And it's mad, like even to this day, that is one of the most vivid memories of my whole career. Like hearing your music on the radio for the first time it sticks with you. And that was N-Type. So yeah, big up him. And then eventually it was obviously getting those bits to Slimzee, which I had to post to him, to the Rhythm Division shop. And yeah, once Slimzee started playing it, then Hatcher was like, oh, give me some exclusives and that. But yeah, Slimzee and N-Type were the first 2, and then I think like closely followed by Hatcher after that.
So what was you producing? Was it Fruity Loops?
Yeah, so producing predominantly would have been Fruity Loops 2.0 and then like 3.56 for a long time. The difference between those 2 versions was Fruity Loops 2.0 had a plugin on it called the TS404, which is, well, if you hear the old classic Skream and Benga, early Big Apple productions, that wobbly bass line, that was written in the TS404. And it only worked and sounded like that in FL 2.0. When it moved to FL 3.56, if you opened any of those old project files, the TS404 sounded completely different. And it was used differently as well. So yeah, anything that sounded a bit like that, like if you listen to, in terms of my catalogue, Pump Up the Jam and a track called Camel Ride, those 2 were produced in the TS404 on FL2. You can tell just from the sound of the bass. But a lot of the rest of my stuff was probably like 3.56 onwards. I actually went back to 2 to do that when I figured out how to use the 404 from sitting in, collaborating with Skream and seeing how he used it. And I was like, I had no idea that was how you manipulated that synth. So I went back, having like probably had a couple of releases at this point, and that's when I was like, right, I want to make, now I can try and make something that sounds a bit more like the dubs. It wasn't called dubstep then, it was still, we didn't know what it was, but it didn't feel like garage. Artwork was like, this isn't garage, you're making something else, but it's good, keep at it. And yeah, I wanted to make some stuff that sounded a bit more like what Skream and Benga were doing, and the TS404 allowed me to like get that kind of bass sound that I couldn't do without it. So yeah, I went back in time to do Pump Up the Jam and Camel Ride with that.
Did you ever use Music 2000 or anything like that?
Only for fun. I had it on my PlayStation, but I can't say I ever bounced anything out of it. My only memories of that were how cheesy like the like reggae vocal samples on it were. I remember laughing at them a lot. But Benga was your guy for that. He was really pretty decent at it.
There's a few rumours about what's been made on PlayStations over the years. But
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure of any that definitely were, but if anyone could make one, it was Benga. I'd definitely seen him. I went to his house and he fired it up, and I was amazed at some of the saves on his memory card. I was like, yeah, but it blew me away what he managed to get out of it. It still wasn't quite as good as the stuff he was making on FL, but it was surprisingly good because I just couldn't believe anyone could get anything decent out of it. I think a magazine asked me a few years ago, like, they were like, "Oh, if we get a copy of that, could you make a tune?" And I was like, "No, no, I couldn't even imagine. I think it'd just be more frustrating than decent, to be honest, if I had a go at that."
So how did you get onto Rinse?
Rinse was, it was like a long. I was wanting to get onto Rinse for a long time. From when I started listening to Slimzee like religiously, I was like, and then he started playing my music. I was like, right, it, this is my time to try and get on this station now. And I remember driving round East London. Um, I used, I had a job in record distribution. So when I started my own label, that was pretty much off the back of the stuff I learnt in that job. So I knew where all the shops were, and I knew the route. So I used to press my own records, borrow my mum's car. She had a bigger car than me, the old Ford Focus. I used to pack all the records into it and do the route. So when I get to like East London, I do like Rhythm Division, Pull for Music in Bow, and then I go into Central London, do like Uptown, Black Market, Release the Groove, all them shops there. So, but in them areas, I could actually pick Rinse up in the car. So I used to listen to it a lot while I was like delivering my records. And I remember hearing a DJ on there, and I don't want to say his name because he's a mate of mine now, but his mixing was atrocious. So I'm like, this guy's like clanging the place up, but he had a tune out. And I was like, he's on the radio because people know of that tune. He's got a big tune out at the minute, and everyone's playing it. And I thought, like, that's how I need to get on Rinse. And like, this was obviously before I'd really established myself. So yeah, I guess driving around them times, I was probably not distributing my own records. That would have been other people's when I heard that, because it was before I started producing. So just to kind of like re-jog my memory. Um, Upon hearing that, that was the realization that if I want to get on that station, I need to get some tunes out. Need to. I've been making beats at this point, but nothing that good. Um, and then I think once Slimzee started playing my music, I was really hot on like, right, who do I speak to? Who do I get a tape to? So when I went to Rhythm Division and did start like delivering music, I was speaking to Sparky in there, and I said like, how do people get on Rinse? Like, what's the process like? And he went, you need to speak to like Slimzee about it. And I think at the time, Logan Sama was a bit like the in-between sort of Slimzee. He was kind of dealing with Slimzee's inbox, if you like. He would kind of collect the promos for him and deliver them to him. So Logan was the one that told me, you need to speak to someone called Doug's, and just do a tape. It's like, do a tape like you were on the radio, do a mix. So I did a mix, gave it to Logan, and he gave it to Doug's. And I got a call from Doug's, and he's like, oh, you know, your mixing's really good and that. We haven't really got anything going at the minute though, but like, you know, we'll be in touch if anything comes available. Gave me like a nice phone call, but kind of let me down, but didn't just leave it, you know. But then a few months down the line, I met Mark One and Oris J, and they obviously had quite a few releases out under the belt. Oris J was like, as far as I was concerned, he was massive. Like, I was well aware of him. I'd been playing his music on the radio for probably a year or two at this point. So I was actually like, he was probably the first person I met where I was like, oh my God, this is someone whose records I play. Because we didn't know what anyone looked like back then. We didn't have MySpace. We didn't have magazines reporting on what we were doing. So I had no idea what he looked like. But Mark sent me some music, and this is how I got to know them. I was writing reviews for Rewind magazine under the guise of Plastic Man, even though I was still DJing as Darkstar these days. That was like a moniker that I used to like secretly review people's vinyl in Rewind mag. So Mark sent me a CD of like an upcoming release he had, and I sent him an email back saying, your music sounds a bit like Oris J, I like it. And he was like, oh, that's my flatmate. And I was like, oh wow, like, have you got any more beats? Like, I'm doing radio now, and I'd love some like dubs. So I was eager. Anyone had any unreleased music for me, I was like, that's what I wanted. So Mark, I got to know Mark through like sending me music, and I was really into everything he sent. And then met Oris through Mark, trying to get them a distribution deal at the company I was working for. And yeah, we became good mates. And then I think Genius said to Oris J, "Do you want to do a show on Rinse?" And he was like, "We could probably do a show on Rinse, but they were travelling down from like Sheffield and Manchester." So Mark said, "Do you want to do it with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." Like, so I used to travel up to Rinse to do the Virus Syndicate show, which was initially I think like 1 till 3 in the morning on a Saturday night. So we go up there. The boys had come down from Manchester. I think Oris came a couple of times, but not often. And then we do the show. And then I think after a few months, um, there was a time where they couldn't get down, and Mark was like, "Do you want to just cover it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to miss radio." So I went up and did it on my own. And I think at the time we were on after Boys in the Hood. So I'll go in there. All the boy, it was like we used to have to crawl into the studio back then. It was like sawdust everywhere, like a double sort of cladded box built inside like a room in the back of a flat in the classic three flats in Bow. That was the first studio I went to. So I'm climbing into the studio with my like record bag and that, and I'm in there on my own. And yeah, so when you not got an MC, I felt like I got to say something on the radio. No one's going to text in. And back then, that's all you wanted as a DJ. You wanted a bit of interaction from that phone line. That was the buzz. Like, oh, people are actually listening to me. You know, it's a bit different to just doing a mix in your bedroom. And yeah, talking about the tunes I was playing, but still playing like mostly instrumental grime. I guess some bits of the early dubstep that I was able to source from Skream and Benga mostly, and then like Cyrus Random Trio and a few people there that maybe some of the producers I've met at Forward around that time as well, early days. So Search and Destroy, Quiet Storms, who we now know as Casper. Yeah, I play a bit of that, whatever I could get my hands on. Chase and Status even actually was some of the early stuff I played. Their early productions, which were like breakbeat garage really. And Genius heard me on the radio, and he called me the next day and was like, "We need a show like what you did last night." He said, "No one talks about the beats that they're playing." It's like, "We've just got MCs spitting over it, but no one talks about the beats." He's like, "Do you want a show of your own?" He's like, "You can still do the other one." And I was like, "Yeah, 100%. And he gave me like 7 till 9 on a Saturday, which was an amazing slot. This kind of coincided around the time that there was like an MC ban on the station. So a lot of the crews kind of got like sidelined, but that opened a massive door for me to come in and do almost like a grime set, but with no MCs. So it meant that I was one of the only people on the station, I guess, that was even playing grime at that time because of that. Because everyone came on with MCs, apart from me. And Logan. Logan used to do an hour. He used to do an hour of garage and an hour of grime back then. So that was it. I think that it opened the door, and right place, right time, just kind of ran with it. And that kind of coincided, I guess, a similar time of like when people started to record the radio shows and they ended up on Bear Files and then like Get Darker, and all these places started popping up where they'd archive people's shows. So if people weren't locked in live, they could actually download it in the week, and then you'd start seeing tens of thousands of people listening to a radio show, and that was like massive. And I just think that I was in such a good spot at that point to like capitalize on the perfect storm of all that happening. It just opened me up to not just people who caught Rinse in the locality, but people who were listening online and stuff in the week.
So I'm guessing through Rinse, that's how you went into Forward.
Yes, did Rinse first, and then, so at the time, I think the only other DJs that were associated with Forward that were on Rinse, there was a Forward show, and that used to be, most of the time, Code 9 would do that. So I think Code 9 was the only other DJ on Rinse at that point in time. And then I think like shortly after that, Hatcher and Crazy D got a show, and then N-Type a little bit further down the line, and then Skream. But yeah, Forward, I think was June 2023, and I think I joined Rinse about March, so there's a few months. And then I think like Sarah Lockhart and Neil, I knew them before that because I was working in a distribution company, and they had a load of stock that they couldn't shift. They had a deal at the time with Essential Direct, which was another distributor who used to distribute all the early Temper, Horsepower, Shelf Life, all of the like Soldier, all of those labels that they used to look after under that under that umbrella at Ammunition Promotions, which also ran Forward. So I met Neil and Sarah before they'd heard me DJ. I was really enthusiastic about the music they were putting out, even though none of the record shops were. It was really hard to sell those early Temper records. The only shop that really wanted them was Uptown and Big Apple. But by the time we got them, I was working for a company called Street Sales. We were just basically getting all the stock that Essential had decided they couldn't sell. So then Neil and Sarah were like, see if you can sell some of that. And I was trying my best to sell it, but it was really difficult to. So I'd met them before that, but I don't think they were aware of me as a DJ or a producer. And through playing on Rinse, I think Neil, one of them, heard me and was like, oh, you work with Mark 1, we know Oris and blah blah, and like we'll book you for Forward. And I was like, oh, I've been going to Forward for a couple of years at this point, so I was like, yeah, I'd love to play Forward. So me and Mark played back to back the first time, June, July 2023, first 2 hours, so like literally to no one initially. And then, like even back then, the busy Forward was about 50 people. It weren't, people think, oh, Forward was like, it was packed. It weren't packed for years, It probably wasn't until around 05 that it really started to get quite busy there. But yeah, I loved it, and I still have very vivid memories of playing that first set there. And yeah, that's how that came about. I think they heard me on Rinse and thought it sounded good enough, and then just added me into the roster. And then obviously I started working with Sarah, had a release on Soldier and a release on Road, which were her labels, under the Ammunition, all part of that. And that was it. They just became a huge part of introducing me to like the world, really, because Forward was the first real DJ booking that I had. I had bookings before that, but it was like more garage and kind of like just playing the sort of pirate radios, like nights that they put on, and you weren't getting paid, and probably like not many people there, and no one knew cared who you were. But in there, it was all about the music you were playing, because no other club night played that music apart from there. And I think Forward was almost born out of talking back to Big Apple again. Big Apple had a Christmas party, which I want to say was like 2001, I think it was, and we got invited to it. They gave sort of these passes out, and they had a little venue in Croydon, and they booked LB did like a live set in there, and they booked Heartless Crew, and Heartless Crew played Pulse X that night, and I was like, what's this? But that night changed a lot for me. But it also, Sarah was there, and she went to that night and was like, we should do this, and that's how she started Forward. Like, she went there, from what I understand anyway, she was inspired by what she saw there to like book that kind of stuff into a regular club night. And that was it. Forward used to be obviously at Velvet Rooms back then, and then eventually moved to Plastic People, that's where it really like established itself.
So did you play much grime at the time, or was that quite frowned upon?
It was frowned upon, but yeah, I did play a lot of grime, and I think back then we didn't have a great read on how it was going to go down until you really got in there and played it. The only thing we had was dubplate.net website, which had a forum on it, and I remember leading up to my first booking there was a topic on there about a set that Hatcher had played at the previous one, where people were moaning about the 8-bar he played, and I was there, and I was like, weren't 8-bar to me. Like, what I know as 8-bar was literally like lo-fi grime, dirty samples, really not particularly well produced. And I thought that when he played, it was weighty. But yeah, I think they were referring to maybe like some of Benga's beats that were like 8-bar, but they were still heavy. But there was a big topic about Hatcher playing grime. Forward's not for this is kids' music, blah blah. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do there? And I think that inspired me a little bit to like push into my productions a bit more and be like, right, I make unapologetically pretty much 8-bar grime, but I'm trying to produce it a bit more, trying to structure it a bit more like these tracks that Hatcher's playing, the Skream tracks, the you know, like the Benga tracks. So I was structuring my stuff like kind of going in with that 8-bar mentality and sound, but trying to structure it more like a longer song. So like the minute long intro, the drop, the breakdown, the second drop. Whereas most 8-bar tunes were literally just 8 bars, copy and paste for 4 minutes. No, nothing changed. It was just for the MCs to spit over. It didn't matter that it was boring, because it's not boring when an MC goes on top of it. So I tried to do that, and so yeah, I remember like reading those forums and being like, I need to get some music done, because Forward was all about having dubs. So you knew you had to come with some stuff that no one had heard either. So yeah, I spent probably a month in the studio, and back then I used to produce a lot, like way more than I do now, living at home with my mum. And yeah, in mum and dad's house, I'm just up all night making beats, made some music, played it there, made sure it was weighty, but it was still, to me, it was still more like grime than the dubstep stuff. So yeah, I definitely played a lot of grime, played vocal grime, but it went down well. I think like I was accepted. I don't know why, but I didn't get the flack. I didn't have anyone moaning on the forums about what I played. I was allowed to do it. I don't know, maybe because Hatcher had represented that sound, that tribal kind of sound that he was doing. So anything that deviated from that, maybe he got the flack. But when I came in, it's like, well, I've been booked because I make that. And they just had to get on accepting it. And actually it went down really well, because I would mix that with dubstep, and I had access to all the dubs in Croydon, but I had access to all the dubs in East because I knew all the Rinse lot, and I was on Slimzee's label, and I'd met, you know, by this point probably met people like Skepta. I had dubs from Jammer and Footsie, and I could mix all of that in. So I was fortunate. I didn't really get any complaints. It just seemed to work. The first time I heard someone play one of my tunes at Forward, I remember again vividly, DJ Shorty was playing. He had a release on Locked On around that time. I think it was called Lawnmower. It was like almost like a grime version of a Dillinger record, and I saw one of my heroes in Forward, right, and I made a beeline for him. Back then everyone used to turn up Forward like CDs of their music, and this guy I can see is holding a couple of CDs of his music, and I'm like, I want one of them CDs. So I've gone over and I'm like, hello mate, my name's Chris, like I DJ as Plastic Man, I make beats. And he's like, he don't know who I am. He's just standing there like, alright, cool. Basically the DJ, it was DJ Narrows, and I wanted some beats off of him. He was one of my favourite producers, and while I'm talking to him I can tell he wants rid of me. So I was about to just leave him to it, and then DJ Shorty played one of my tracks. I think it was The Lift, if I remember rightly. It was either The Lift or Spring Roller, that got a quite similar bass sound. I can't remember which of the two. I want to say The Lift. I'm 90% sure it was The Lift, if memory served me right. But when he played it, I was saying to Narrow, I was like, this is my tune. But I'd never heard my tune in Forward, so I was like equally excited that I'm hearing my tune in Forward, and I also thought I might actually get some dubs off of Narrows now if he likes this tune. And he's like, oh yeah, cool, this your tune, yeah? Like, kind of shook my hand and that. I didn't get a CD off of him, but he knew who I was. The next time I saw him, we was cool and we swapped CDs, and that was that. But after that, the next one I heard other people play my tune at Forward was Hatcher played Hard Graft, and he got a reload. And them times we used to get a stretch limo to Forward from Croydon. So it was like, I got in a stretch limo with a bunch of people I didn't know. Like, all the people I knew from Croydon were in there was 2 stretch limos, right? Hatcher's got all of his A-team in the front limo, and all of the rest of us got chucked in the second one. So I'm in there with a bunch of like the sort of like the new schoolers, if you like. I didn't know who any of them were. We were chatting all the way up there, and then he played my tune, and it got a reload. So all the boys that were in the like front limo were like, who made that? And there's like, I was like, Plastic Man made it. That's him over there. So then everyone's coming, he's like, oh, how do I get that tune off you? Can I get that tune off you? I felt like royalty on the way home. Honestly, it was like my status went from second limo to first limo. In that moment, I probably could have got in the first limo home. But yeah, it was funny. It was almost like a hierarchy. But when you got your tunes actually played at Forward, that was like the acceptance, like you're in big school now when that happens, you know.
Just taking it back a bit, Slimzee put out your first release. How did that come about?
Literally me sending him a CD. I sent it in the post, old school, to Rhythm Division, and it had probably about 5 tracks on it. A track called Venom, which was the A side, and then a few other bits that nothing came of really. But back then the family computer was in like the living room in the downstairs of the like house, and I was making my beats on a version of Fruity that weren't even cracked, so I couldn't save anything. I used to have to make it, finish it, and then record it like audio onto a mini disc because I didn't know how to. I couldn't save it, so I used to stay up all night. And back then I didn't even know that I could record with the volume turned off. So I used to literally like have this system, and I would turn it up to full whack at like 3 a.m. I'd get my duvet and my pillows and be like sitting down there like that, like downstairs, recording this tune at full volume in my house. My parents are asleep upstairs, just so I could get it onto a mini disc and turn the computer off at the end of the night. And that's how I used to finish my tracks. And I sent the CD to Slim, and one of them was Venom. And a few weeks later, I'm sat at that same computer just messing about, and I had the Nokia 8210 with a red case on it, and it buzzed, and it was like, I like them tunes, it's Slimzee, save my number. And my heart, honestly, it was like, I think I stood up. I was shaking. I was like so excited, but I couldn't believe it. So I texted him back and I was like, oh, glad you like it. He's like, and then he said, can I have it exclusive? And I said, yeah. And then a few weeks later, he texted me again saying, oh, I'm going to start a label. Have you got anything for the B-side? And then I made Shockwave. And he played that on New Year's Eve Sidewinder tape pack before it come out. And obviously that was massive back then. Slimzee playing your tune on a tape pack. That was like, everyone's hearing that. Slimzee was like the tape that everyone wanted to listen to, and it was full of music that was unreleased every time he played there. So him playing that on there on the New Year's Eve, I think it was like either like the last tune before the midnight or the first tune after it. I can't remember what one, but it was right at like a moment. And I think he had Viper or B Live or someone on the set.
Slim and PA new dubs. It's called some wobbling. You love the wobblers, innit?
And yeah, that just set the tone for that release. It came out as Slimzee 002. So I think the first one was the Heinz ED, which was like the controversial one.
Yeah, Bionics.
It was released as Bionics, but it was actually Heinz ED. So yeah, mine was like 002, and yeah, that was massive for me, having that release.
Wasn't it Rico? Didn't he diss someone over it?
I think you're right. Yeah, he did.
Some more fire.
Yeah, because I did some dubs for him around that time as well. I did like a bootleg version of like Ho and Morefire Oi that Slimzee played in the middle of like a lot of those.
Something like that,
yeah, and that was, I think someone bought that dub off of Slimzee recently. Someone was telling me they got that, but no one knew that was me. But I did make a dub or two for him in the heat of that clash, and I think Rico went over that, and I think he probably would have around that time. He was still playing like Venom and Shockwave a lot in those sets, so there's a solid chance. There's some good clips of it from that time.
So obviously at some point you started your own label, Terrorism Recordings. What made you want to start this?
I think for me it was like having the freedom to release as and when I saw fit, and I knew obviously how distribution worked because I worked in distribution before, so it just made sense to me to start my own label because I felt like I was sat on so much music at the time, and I was sort of stockpiling it because I didn't want to make more until I got that out, which was slowing me down. So releasing some music on the label felt like it made sense that I could pick and choose the EPs that I thought. So yeah, I started doing that, and I think because Mark 1 released Hard Graft on his Contagious label, he owed me a release back, so it was like I may as well start a label. Have you got a release for me? And he did The Fight, and I remixed that, and that was the first one. And then the second one was the Value Beats EP, which was Be There or Be Square and Aqua Rhythm, which I still really like Aquarhythm thing. At the time, it was the first time I'd ever used a virtual synth in a track and actually played chords rather than just playing samples in. And then Char, Shallow Grave, and The Search was the third, which is probably to this day, I guess, like in terms of grime instrumentals that I released, those all three of those are like ones that have kind of stood the test of time. And I think at the time, I didn't feel like many people were that bothered about those tracks to really playing them. I heard EZ play Char. That was massive for me. I got nominated for like Sidewinder Best Producer in, I want to say it was like 2003 or 2. And EZ played that night, and I'm at the bar. I was there on my own. I'm at the bar, and he played Char, and I was like, "What is going on?" I must have been shaking because, like, he got me into music. He's the reason I wanted to be a DJ, and to hear him playing that, and I hadn't sent him it, so like he's bought that, or someone's told him you need this tune. So that was a massive shock. But apart from that, I didn't hear it out that much. I heard like radio clips of it here and there, but it wasn't until later on in my career when I met people from like out of London. You know, like grime was very London back then, so we had no idea what was going on outside. But as we got older and the scene kind of expanded and you met people from other cities, it became apparent that those songs that I made around that time were like the anthems on the mobile phones in the playground where everyone's spitting. If you go to like the Midlands and that and talk to people from Nottingham, every MC from Nottingham's like, they all know all of my old stuff way better than most people from London did when I was making it back then. Because apart from me, I didn't feel like any of the other DJs on the circuit were playing it. Apart, maybe Joker did play a few bits and here and there. It wasn't until I made like more dubstep leaning stuff that I really got the support of what I felt like my peers. But yeah, it was weird because it was just, I guess back then we didn't have the internet. It was, unless you caught it on the radio, you didn't know if anyone was even playing it unless you went back into the record shop to see if like there was any money owed or if they needed any more copies. And it was like that Char EP particularly, I'm 90% certain that the distributor who was looking after it at the time was repressing it behind my back as well, because I've seen copies of it that I'm like, there were no white label copies of that, and there's a lot of white label copies of that track. So I'm like, there was like 10 test pressings, and I've seen hundreds of them, so God knows how many units it sold. It's hard to be entirely sure, but there was a lot of stuff like that going on at the time. We pulled up one distributor who was trying to hold money back from me and stuff, and it was dark back then. It was like, you know, I'm not a fighter, but I had to call on some friends to like muscle in on a few people back them days. But yeah, those times were mad. But the vinyl sales on that were like, made me realise, oh, like I've got a pretty big tune here. Like this is obviously doing units, and that was a big one for me. I think Char really put me on the map. Like it went beyond grime. That was like, you know, EZ playing it was like, he didn't play every grime tune, but he played like the big ones, the main ones, same as what he does now. You know, like you hear him now, he picks a bit of everything that's out there, but he will play like the big tune in like the bassy house scene, or you know, like dubstep. You know, like when Night blew up, he was playing that, and him playing Char at that time was like in the middle of a garage set was a big thing, definitely.
When did you make that?
Char, I want to say I made that around 2003, I think.
What was the process behind that? Because it sounds so far ahead of anything in 2003.
I think it was like, again, it was like 8-bar. I'm trying to think what was the inspiration for that one. Because I remember like Venom, the big inspiration for Venom was Stomp by Big Shot. Because it was like an 8-bar tune that had a long intro and had lots of intricate switches in it in the 8s. So I could tell there was a bit of progression there. And that pushed me to make that, like try and make an 8-bar tune that has a little bit more going on. And I think that Char was probably just like a grown-up version of that, where it was like, it's 8-bar, but you kind of like, there's more like 32-bar patterns in it if you listen to it carefully. But then there's a little bit of a switch up on the tail end. But also like the mix of it is just a lot cleaner. I didn't really use any dirty samples in it. It was more like high fidelity samples. So it really just kicked through, because around them times I was playing forward, so sound started to matter a lot more. I realised the difference playing like some of my early productions versus some of the newer stuff I was making. I mean, even back then, it was probably like, I was probably bouncing out and playing like literally like 128 kilobyte WAVs, MP3s back then, not knowing the difference between an MP3 and a WAV, just looking at how much storage it was taking up on my computer. I wouldn't be surprised if some of my early vinyl was even mastered off MP3s, to be honest. I'd be more surprised if it was like WAVs. But by the time I'd had a few releases under my belt and probably played forward a couple of times, I think by the time I made Char, it was a little bit more like, I'm a bit more tuned in on like how to get the sound a bit bigger. So that was probably why that sounded a little bit more big in terms of grime. And I think that was where putting them sort of tunes out was when people in grime were like, oh, he's not grime, because it started to sound like a bit different. Even though in my head it was grime, I was just trying to level it up a bit. But then in dubstep, it's like, well, that's not dubstep. So I was like stuck in the middle of the two. But I think I played that to my advantage, because I wanted to be in the middle. I wanted to be different to everyone else. I wanted to have, no one else had access to those dubs, so why would I give that up to someone else? Like, no one else could play Skream and like Skepta dubs in the same set. It just wasn't until maybe a year or two down the line, once the scene started to meet each other at nights like forward basically, and we started to share lineups, and that's when people had access to those. But for a year or so, I was definitely the only person that could draw from like those two pools.
There's a rumour that there's a Michael Jackson snare.
Yeah. It's the snare from Beat It in Char. The original version of it that I made did have the same clap from Dizzy Rascal, I Love You in it, but I changed it for an XR10 clap, which is very similar, but a way cleaner sample. And that was the thinking behind that. The original version had a Dizzy Rascal clap in it. It sounded way better when I switched it out. It's just much cleaner because the sample was so poor that I'd used.
Did you start promoting your own nights around this point?
First night I promoted was 2003, Filthy Dub. I did that with my mate Dave in 1921, which was the same venue that hosted the Big Apple Christmas party a few years prior, but it changed names and changed ownership. It was reopening as 1921, and it was like your classic kind of Croydon Friday night, Saturday night, cheap drinks, you know, dress code to get in, that kind of thing. So we really had to sell it to them that this is a bit different to what goes on in Croydon, but we're involved in this music. We play this night in Shoreditch, but a lot of the producers are from around here. We think people will come out. Can we do like a Thursday or something like that, try it out? So they were like, yeah, sure. So we booked, if my memory serves me right, the first night was, I think the first night was N-Type, Chef, Skream and Benga, me, Mark 1. I feel like Big Nasty might have been booked for it. I'd have to look up my phone and remind myself, but we did one there, and it went all right. It wasn't like amazing, but everyone that came was like, that was sick. The venue weren't annoyed about it. We had enough people in there. They were a little bit bit confused as to like why everyone was wearing trainers and stuff like that, but and why there was no girls there as well. They were like a bit worried that it was going to kick off, and I was like, it's not going to kick off. Everyone here are like music nerds. They all know each other. No one's going to have a fight. And then they were like, okay, you can do another one. So the second one, and I think I booked Slimzee, Hatcher, Loafer. Did I book Mala? I don't know. It was Loafer's first ever DJ booking as Loafer, and the prior one was the first time Skream and Benga were on a lineup as well, actually. So I was the first promoter to book those people at that night. But the second one kind of ended in tears. We had like the council turn up with decibel meters moaning about sound that was bleeding outside. Police turned up to sort of have a look round. They didn't like the look of the clientele. Didn't understand why no one had shoes and shirts on, and which was, you know, everywhere in Croydon you had to wear shoes and a collar. That was standard. So anywhere that had trainers, they were like, what's going on? hoodies and trainers, did not like the look of our clientele at all. And then eventually Skream got arrested because he was seen to give his mate £50 that he owed him. They arrested him under suspicion of dealing drugs on the venue. Literally got outside, they were knelt on his back in front of a queue, like marched him off to the cells. The venue's losing their mind with me and Dave. We got to shut this down. You got to shut this down. My venue, we are not losing our license because of your night, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, he ain't done nothing, honestly. He got released from the cells. He had nothing on him. He had nothing on him. They couldn't pin anything on him. Had to let him go. But the night got cut short. So I don't think Slimzee even got to play. He got all the way down there in the night to just give him his money and let him drive back home. But yeah, so that was the last one we did there. Then the next one we did at the Telegraph in Brixton, which was where the Clash played their first ever gig. And I was away for that. I was on tour. One of my early trips abroad. I can't remember where I was, but I knew I wasn't around. So Dave managed that on his own. And I think Skream, Benga, I think Mala and Loafer played that, Youngster. Really good lineup in a better room, but we just didn't get the turnout. So that was kind of like nailing the coffin for it, unfortunately. But yeah, that was before, that predated obviously like DMZ and stuff like that. Other than that, I think the only other nights outside of Forward that I can remember was Slaughter Mob had a night called Thriller Funk, which was at Herbal, quite near Forward. It was in the Shoreditch area, and that was good. So like Slaughter Mob played there, booked me there a couple of times. Rephlex used to play there, but yeah, other than that, it was just those nights. That was it. And then it wasn't until like maybe 04 or 05, my first sort of gig out of London was like for Pinch at Subloaded in Bristol, and that was the first kind of venture out of London properly. The closest we got beyond that, I think, was I played a gig in North London in a little pub which some guy put on, and booked like me and Chase and Status, and we played in a little pub in North London. Yeah, that was an early booking as well.
In 2004 there was the Rephlex Grime compilation, and it's considered quite a landmark moment in the scene. Was that a big moment for your career?
That was massive. The Rephlex, I remember Neil, who ran Ammunition, calling me in for a meeting, but they used to be on Brick Lane. So I went up to Brick Lane to see him, and he was like, right, big news. We've had Rephlex in touch. And I was like, you're talking gibberish to me. I was like, I was a garage man. I didn't know anything outside of garage labels. And he's like, he looked at me and he was like, I'm like, okay. And he's like, you don't know what Rephlex is, do you? And I went, no. And he went, Aphex Twin. And I went, don't know who that is either. And he's like, you joking? He's like playing me some music, and I'm like, playing me like IDM stuff, and I'm like, this is mad. Like, why do they want my music? What? And he went, this is big, trust me. Like, this is gonna put you in like electronica world. You won't just be like a garage DJ. If this works out, this pushes your sound into like what he believed to be like what he always thought, when they get whiff of what we're doing, it's going to be massive. So he was buzzing about it, and I'm like, well, if you are buzzing about it, it sounds good, let's do it. And then I met Grant, who ran the label, and I really liked him, and he was like, met me at Forward, and it was like, oh, we definitely want to do this. We're going on tour in like March in America. Would you be up for coming? And I was like, yeah. I've never been to America in my life. So I got my first gigs out in America touring with Rephlex. Me and Mark One, two kids from like garage, literally touring with Bogdan Rosinski and Sound Murderer, which is like, Bogdan's playing like 300 BPM IDM, like losing his mind on stage. Me and Mark are used to like, you know, shoes and shirt, champagne popping, like everyone dressed up to the nines, and suddenly there's people rolling around in like pools of piss on the floor and shit. I'm like, what is going on? We were like, what is going on here? We'd never even seen, you know, like, barring like Forward was about as extreme as it got, just seeing people in hoodies and smoking weed in a club. But going to America and seeing like the IDM crowd and like Sound Murder playing like, you know, like hardcore jungle, and then Bogdan doing like glitch, and I'd never heard, didn't even know music like that existed. But it was like Grant used to, he used to like, we would normally open up and then they would play like, so it made sense the way it flowed. But Grant was like, your music's sexy to these people. It's like sexy music. And I used to open up with like Terror Danger and stuff like that on that tour. Really like synth heavy grime, and people loved it. It was really going down well. So then off the back of that, we had the release, and I stayed really close with like Grant and Marcus, who was working for them at the time, who now works for Hyperdub. And yeah, they got me involved in loads of gigs. They did like, we played in France. I played back to back with like Ed DMX in France, and got to meet Ed, and then and like CFAX Acid Crew, Square Pusher. Like, I was put on some really big. Like, I understand now how big and how important that is. Back then, it was just like, who are all these people playing this weird music? Like, but I liked them all, and like accepted that their music was like really loved by the people that came out for it. It was like getting to play to their crowd was like a privilege. I realised that quite quickly. But yeah, it broadened my horizons. I'd never heard that kind of music before. I didn't know it existed. So it was massive for me in terms of knowing. It kind of like, it validified for me, like, it was the first time I ever thought our sound was going to get out of garage. You know, if we go back to like when I changed my name from Plastician to Plastic Man, would have been similar time to around when all this was going on, because it wasn't really until we started doing that whispers were getting that he knows who you are and it's only a matter of time before you're gonna have to change your name. And I'm like, I remember Artwork, he's like, you do know there's another Plastic Man, right? And I was like, no. And he goes, well, I've got to play you something now then. So he was in the record shop and he played me this record. Couldn't tell you what one it was. All I heard was techno. I'm like, well, he ain't gonna ever hear my music. And yeah, lo and behold, a few years down the line, doing Rephlex and then remixing, I think it was Alter Ego track that came out on Skin. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like, now you're on his patch. And we got the letter and I had to change the name. But the Rephlex thing definitely like that was a kick on from playing like what we considered to be like garage events in the UK. Suddenly we're on electronica lineups. Festivals are interested in me playing on lineups of people that I've never heard of, and people are receptive to it. And that was, I think that was the first taste of me. I'm like, might be a living in this for me. Like, I didn't think I'd earn a lot of money, but it started to earn me more than I was getting off my dad for helping him out, like on site, you know, and his jobs. And yeah, that was, I think the beginning of it, like 2004 or 5 was when I was like, if I can like save some money, I could probably like turn this into a job.
Obviously, it was called Grime as well. But it was it you, Mark 1?
Slaughter Mob on the first one, yeah.
And then obviously there was Grime 2, which was like Code 9. Would you say it was Grime, or would you say...
I think what me and Mark 1 were doing was what we considered what we were doing to be grime. We didn't consider Slaughter Mob to be grime. I definitely thought that was more leaning into like what I think around that time the maybe the phrase had been coined by then. So I think they were a little bit more like dubstep, but because we were like so heavily attached to Forward to like the grime press, we were always dubstep to them because we were Forward. Even though we thought we were grime, because we played at Forward, we were automatically with that crew. We weren't the same as like Jammer and Da Vinci and like Johnny Cash and all that. We were different to them because we played at Forward. Those guys weren't getting played at Forward, but we were. Therefore, we're with that lot. Therefore, that's not grime. That's, you know, some people would have called it dubstep, but I'd still argue now like that those songs were not dubstep to me. But also can understand why people don't think it was grime. And yeah, it was somewhere in between. And I think Slaughter Mob was definitely more like dubstep leaning. Mine and Mark's is definitely for me more leaning towards grime, but can totally understand why people were like, this ain't grime. There was no vocals on it for a start. Like,
I guess it signified a change from garage into whatever.
Yeah.
Was going darker and
yeah, it was a big statement from Rephlex as well. And remember the flyers they put out for the club night had a big kind of explanation on the back of what is grime, what it means, blah blah. And the way they explained it was like how they would have explained it to their crowd, versus like it wasn't like saying to all the grime lot like what you lot are doing ain't grime. It was more like how are we going to present this to an like electronica crowd, explain what grime is and what they think it means. And yeah, I think to their crowd it worked, and I don't think it hurt like it didn't harm like the what's the word, the perception of what real grime was to people that listen to grime either. So I think it helped everyone in the end.
So soon after that, you start touring quite a bit with Skepta. How did the two of you meet?
First time I met Skepta, I don't know exactly what year it was, but I know exactly where it was at Music House. I was cutting dubs. Sometimes I'd just cut dubs in different places because I knew I'd bump into different people. I realised that like obviously Transition was like my local, and I didn't go there. But when you're in Transition, it was a bit more private. You're in there in the room in your own with Jason. You cut your dubs, and there'd be a little waiting room out the back. They kind of hear what you were playing, but not much. There was very little interaction with other customers there. You had a appointment time, whereas at Music House it was no appointments. You turn up and wait your turn, like a queuing system. So you could be in the waiting room there for hours on end. But I did meet some quite cool people there, so I didn't mind going because I thought I might be able to cut some dubs off other people. So that was my thinking there. And on that particular time, I think Footsie was there as well, and I had beats from him before, but I don't think I'd met him in person. So I was like, oh, you're Footsie. He used to kind of, there was a guy called Corey Johnson who used to kind of be like a middleman between like South and East for like grime, and he used to kind of like, Footsie used to give him dubs to give to like the South DJs. Likewise, I'd give dubs to Corey to give to East guys as well. And so I met Footsie was there, and there's this other guy in there just quiet, minding his own business. And then I went in to cut, and I was cutting a VIP mix of Venom, and the door's like ajar, and this guy's kind of poked his head and he said, "Did you make this tune?" And I said, "Yeah." And he went, "Can you make me a special?" And I was like, "Yeah, alright." And he goes, "Give me your phone." I put my phone, he put his number in it, it was Skepta. But he was really like rude and abrupt, and I was just like, whatever. Left it. A couple of days later, I'm working with my dad, and the phone rings, and I picked it up, and he went, "Yeah, Skepta, you done that tune for me yet?" And I went, "Nah, not yet." And he went, "Alright, call me when it's done." Just hung up. And I was like, prick. But I ain't giving him no dubs, whatever. But then I got chatting to his brother more on, I didn't know they were brothers, but I was probably talking to JME on like MSN Messenger around this time, sending beats back and forwards, trying to like figure out if we could do a set together and stuff like that. And then it transpired that he was Skepta's brother, and I was like, "Oh, I met your brother." And he's like, "Oh yeah, he said he met you." Like, and I was like, "Oh, I'll send the dub, like pass this on to him." Like, I then had signed with an agent, Rebecca Prochnik, who was looking after, she was trying to package like a grime crew to like bookers. So she was looking after DJ Cameo as well, but she was also looking after Tinchy Strider, Crazy Titch, J2K, Lady Fury, can't remember who else. There was a bunch of MCs she was looking after, Bruiser. And she was like, "Would you be interested in doing some grime sets with all these people?" And I was like, "Yeah, like that'd be amazing." And then around the same time as that all happening, I'm talking to JME, and we're trying to figure out if we can get bookings together. And then this Belgian promoter contacted me directly and was like, "We've got this budget." The budget was like, it's mad saying this now, but the whole budget for the weekend was like, he had this festival called like I think it was like Nuit Sonore or something like that, which is like quite a big festival now, but at the time it was like a small thing in a park in Brussels. And he's like, "We got €800. Can you put like 4 hours worth together for us?" He's like, "We'll put you up, we'll get you over there, like Eurostar, and put you up." And I was like, "Alright." So I basically talked for €800. He got me, Mark 1, JSD and Nick D from Virus Syndicate, Jammer, Skepta, Mala, Koki, Logan Sama, and yeah, we split €800 between all of us. Went there on like a weekend. JME was supposed to come as well, but couldn't make it. So when he couldn't make it, that's how Skepta came in. I've met him a few times before then, but like we spent time on that weekend, all of us together. It was like lads on tour. It was like we were like little boys. Like the promoters just like plying us with drinks. They're feeding us. We all got really drunk. We had a good time. We had a day off the day after the gig. We went to like the fun fair. It was amazing. It was such a funny weekend. And I think that was it. Like when you travel with someone for the first time, it's different to just like doing a session or something with them. And I realised that me and Skepta were so alike that like I knew he was going to be my mate. I was like, this guy and me, we're just on a level. Same with Jammer. The two, all of us like that weekend just got on so well. Obviously already knew Mark really well, was super tight with him as well. Mala and Koki I knew pretty well through like, you know, doing bits and bobs at Forward, and yeah, it was just a mad weekend. We had the best time. And then after that, yeah, Skepta and I were just like always in contact, sending beats to each other. If I had a gig, he'd be like, "Can I come with you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, just sit in the car." We'd drive up to Bristol, drive up to Manchester, Leeds. He was just, any gig I had, he was there. Like, and then he started to build a real name for himself. So then it was like I was coming to his bookings. Like he needed a DJ. It was me. Then there was talk of like we should start a crew. We should start a crew and that. And Skepta was like, he started being in Roll Deep at the time as well. And JME was like kind of on the periphery because he wasn't like officially a member of Roll Deep, but he'd roll in and out with them. But they was talking of making a crew, and then at one point we were going to call this crew like 100%, and he was talking about it being like me, him, Jamie, Prez T, and can't remember who else was talking about doing it. But anyway, that kind of fizzled out. And then the Boy Better Know thing come about, I guess we were still gigging quite a lot, but my bookings in the sort of dubstep side of things went, like dubstep really picked up massive, and I was obviously in that Forward booking circuit. I was playing everywhere, more like dubstep leaning. Some places didn't want me to bring an MC with me.
This is like 2006.
Yeah, and around the same time as that happening, that's when Max came back involved a bit more with Skepta, and that he became the Boy Better Know DJ. But obviously I was still like involved on the periphery of all that productions for him and still doing loads of gigs and that, but Max was predominantly the DJ for them in the end. But yeah, like I think there was a time around then, I think I probably spent more time with Skepta than any of my friends. Like he's probably my best mate for a good year or two around then. We were, yeah, I'd travel up to Tottenham and we just hang about, try and make beats, and yeah, not always particularly good. Then we just, you know, start drinking, and I had a very similar relationship with him that I had with like my mates who didn't do music. So he was easy to just hang around with, and yeah, if he wanted to come to your gig, you knew it was gonna be funny as well. Like it weren't just that'll be great, like come and spit, we'll kill it. It was like we will get drunk and have a laugh as well. And yeah, we were quite similar in that vein, that we were similar in age. Like we were born the same year. It's only a month between us. And Jammer similarly was just on the same wavelength of us as well. So then we start getting gigs abroad. Like I'm taking you, I can get you in this gig in New York. We're going New York together. First time that they've been out there. Yeah, like amazing time. It was so funny, and the music that we were all like came out at that time was like still kind of stands up to this day.
Is there any particularly memorable tours or dates?
The New York one's always super memorable. I think the first time they'd been out there, we had like MTV following us around, and yeah, it felt important. We felt important out there for the first time, you know. It was like something big's bubbling up here. I remember Skepta on the flight over there he went down to go to use the toilet or whatever, and he's come back and he's gassed. He's like proper like a little kid. He's like, someone down there just recognised me. I was like, no, they didn't. We were like, fuck off. Like, no way. And he's like, honestly, trust me, there's a boy and a girl sat down there near the toilet and they asked me if I was Skepta. And we were like, all right, cool. And like, but that's night and day to where we're at now. I remember him saying things in the car, like him and my mate Aaron were coming back in a car from Bristol. We had a mad one. We stayed there, come back the next day, and we was talking about how, like, who do I need to drop where, how are you getting home? And I was like, can I just drop you at like King's Cross? You can just get to Tottenham from there on the tube. And he's like, I can't get on the train. And me and my mate Aaron were like, you ain't that famous, bruv. Like, you can get on the train. But yeah, it's funny now looking at it. It's like, he always knew. He in his head was like, gonna be a superstar. He was like, he had this determination, but he had a belief. Like, I never ever thought, there was never a time in my career where I thought, I'm gonna be this, or I'm gonna, even when like, you know, it became a job. I didn't think it would ever be my job, and then it eventually did become it. But he knew, he had this thing in him, like, he knew in his head he was going to be something special one day, I think. And I'm not surprised that he's done what he's done. He's just got this mad work ethic, and yeah, fair play to him. He's like absolutely killed it. So, but he knew back then, you know, he always had that fire in his belly. He knew something, he had better things to move on to.
Go on, man.
So Intensive Snare come about. There were sort of two steps in that process. The first step, the way the beat got made was weird, because One Extra hit me and DJ Wonder up with a sample pack. I think it was like Richie Vibe V's show at the time. He was like the garage DJ on One Extra, and they set us a challenge of like making a beat with these sounds, and the beat for Intensive Snare was the beat I made for that challenge. So I finished that up, turned it into a beat. The beat instrumental was called like Galvanized. It was on my CDs for like ages when I was playing it out quite a bit. And then I signed a publishing deal at the time with EMI, which gave me access to like a studio with a good engineer. And I was like, sweet, I can start getting vocals recorded and it's not going to cost anyone anything. So I booked 2 days in the studio, and obviously Skepta being like my pal at the time, was like, do you want to get in studio for 2 days? Let's just see how many tunes we can bang out. Day one, we get in, he's in there, and we're going through the beats, and I didn't think he would pick that one. That was the last tune I thought he would pick out of all the beats that I had. And he was like, yeah, this one. And he was like, this is a forward one. This is a forward beat. And I'm like, yeah, I'm hearing it. And like we're like mimicking Crazy D over it and stuff, and that's how the like forward comes about. That's Crazy D basically. So he's done that on the intro, and at the time he was writing an album called, what he thought was going to be called More Than Grime. So that's where More Than Grime comes from in that intro, because he was like, yeah, this is for my album. And I was like, gutted. I wanted it for mine. I'm not sure how EMI will be about that, but I think the deal I had was publishing, so it wouldn't have mattered if it was on my album or his. I still would have been fulfilling like something there. But so yeah, More Than Grime was what he thought his album was going to be called. And even them sessions there, the reason that his album, that it didn't ended up becoming called Greatest Hits, was because we were joking in the studio, how funny would it be if your first album was called Greatest Hits? Like, you haven't had a single out yet. And that is it, his album Greatest Hits, even though he hadn't had an album out to that point. It's mixtapes and that, singles. But singles on the underground anyway. But it was like, we did that track in one day, and then obviously went on to Rinse that night and played it. And it's mad listening back to think like, that was a lot we did in that day.
Next one, worldwide exclusive, yeah? Well, no, but play half of it because this is from my album. Alright, listen, this is a worldwide exclusive. Let's go. Let's tell them what we've been doing today in the studio. EMI. Old tight Tony.
And then literally the next day went in and I was saying like, oh, let's invite some more MCs down tomorrow. And he's like, oh, I'm going to invite Sludem. And I was like, right, I've never met Sludem before, but I know that infamously they're like head cases I'm like, oh my god, like he's gonna bring Chronic down. I'm hearing all these stories about Chronic being this maniac and Temper T, and I'm like, fuck, are these guys gonna behave themselves in the studio? Am I gonna lose like my deal? Or but they turn up and they was like super chill. Turn up. About the most like outlandish thing they done was there was like drinks in. There was like a fridge, and there was like cans of drink in there. It's like help yourself to the drinks, and there was like big cartons of juice in there and like cans of everything. And I think like Chronic and Temps both picked up a carton and just drinking it like that. Like I just thought, oh, I don't think the cartons are there to just be drunk out like that. But that was really the worst thing that they done. But they was like sweet as, they cracked on. We had a laugh with them as well. Like I'd never met them before, so I didn't know what. And I think back then you always were a bit like, you had to feel like you had to act a certain way to get the respect of people. So like everyone was always a bit standoffish with each other in the grime world back then, because I think there was obviously ties to like trouble and gangs and stuff, and you didn't know if this person had an issue with one of your friends or vice versa. So whenever you met someone from the grime scene, you were always a bit like, you had to act like you're not going to take shit from them, or they can't mess you about. They can't fucking bore you off or whatever. And that dropped pretty quickly in that session. I thought we were going to spend most of the day kind of walking on eggshells around each other to not like look like. But no, like everyone was pretty chill, and we was laughing and joking, bantering. I don't think it was that session, but around them times when we saw Temps in the booth, the way Temps spat on the mic was like, he's like that. And like, I used to talk to Jamie and I was like, he looks like he's got a headache. And that's where the migraine skank term came from. We were like, when Temps is spitting, he's skanking like he's got a migraine. And I did a gig in Stoke with JME, and he recorded a vlog. He used to record vlogs for his MySpace back then. And I think he mentioned, I don't know if it's a video or thing, but he had like pictures, and he coined the phrase migraine skank on his vlog on his MySpace, which was massively popular back then as well. And yeah, off the back of that, obviously Gracious K did a tune called Migraine Skank, but that term was us like basically bantering Temps about the way he was spitting into the mic, like his hands, like, yeah, funny. But yeah, that was Real Things the second day. And then we recorded some freestyles as well that never came out. I've still got the files for them, so you never know, you might hear bits of it one day.
Why did Intensive Snare not go on Skepta's album?
I wanted it for mine. I was just quite, I think like the processes on the two were going on, and I had probably 70% of mine done. I just wanted a couple of vocal tracks to sort of make it feel like it had some grime on it, proper grime on it. And it was getting on and on and on, and I was like, Skepta, I was like, can we talk about Intensive Snare? Like, what's going on with your album? How far along is it? What are you thinking? Like, because I was like, I think if this goes on my album, it'll probably be like the main song. Whereas like, if it goes on yours, it might be a filler. And I was like, we've got like the backing of EMI publishing and stuff here, and you know, we might be able to get some money behind it. It wasn't the case in the end, but you know, I think I sold the idea to him that this will be like a main single off of my album if it comes to that, and we get the budget to do videos and stuff like that. So I put some money towards, I paid for a video, like the video that's still online, the Dr. Smooth one. I think it cost me like $800 or something like that. It's pretty good. I think hood videos around them were probably about the same time, but they looked really bad. So I was quite pleased with that in the end. I thought it was quite different from what people were doing at the time. So yeah, that was it. I think it was just a conversation, just like his was taking a bit longer, mine was pretty much ready if I could get that track on it. So yeah, once he agreed to let me have that, that was like album done pretty much. That was like that was it, stamped and signed and sealed then.
That tune for me always feels like quite a big crossover between grime and dubstep, and obviously inspired by Forward. Was you performing with Skepta a lot at Forward?
Yeah, it's funny because like Sarah never used to let MCs on the mic. Yeah. Crazy D was the only person allowed on the mic for a while. I think like before that, like Juice Man might have been on the mic a bit, but then there was a period where Crazy was the only person that you would hear at Forward, and he'd host the whole night. And then I think as I started to play a bit more, and I think maybe the crowd opened up to a bit more grime as well, like vocal grime being played in the venue. Sarah met Skepta and Jammer, and she knew all those boys anyway. So, and I think that like when she saw that they weren't just there, they weren't just turning up to try and spit, because a lot of MCs just don't care about the music they're spitting on. They just want to be heard. Whereas those boys, being like Skepta, Wiley, JME, those guys were in there like vibing off the tunes. They didn't need to go in there and spit. They were happy in the dance, just respecting. So they used to turn up as punters, just listen, like hope to hear something. Like if I was playing, they knew they'd hear some of their songs. So eventually it was like, I think Sarah was like, oh no, these guys get it. They've watched Crazy D. They know they can't just come on here and shout the place down. They're going to have to like pick their moments. And I think even like doing that set on Rinse with Skepta where he kind of hosted it on his own and jumps in and out. And it's like, he'll respect that. That's more true to how Forward runs. It's not Sidewinder. You're not here to get reloads. You're here to, the music is as important as the MC. Whereas you go Sidewinder, your background music for the MC, which was a big part of the reason that I lent heavily into when dubstep was kicking off. I'm like, sweet, I can be the guy. I didn't want to just be pressing buttons for the MC in the background. So being able to do that, and then being able to respect that, it was like we get the best of both. When they start MCing, they're spitting bars, they're getting reloads, they're getting the big reactions, but also they're letting the tunes breathe when they know it's time to let it breathe. And not many MCs are capable of doing that. Like, still to this day, a lot of MCs that aren't experienced in maybe going, nowadays it might be like going to Outlook and seeing how someone like Chunky or Pokes holds the mic and holds the set, and understand like, yeah, you can go do that. Like P Money was also very good at it because they were into the music. As a lot of grime MCs will come and just like, they're not really into the beat, they're just hearing the tempo and they'll just do what they're doing on a grime set, not completely oblivious that the crowd are kind of getting a bit alienated. So it was, I could understand why Sarah didn't want loads of grime MCs in there, because most of them were only there for themselves, weren't there for like the night or the music that was being played. So that was why they were so precious of like the mic at Forward. That was literally like a drive home from Bristol. Might have even been that same one I was talking about where we were bantering Skepta about getting on a train, but we were coming back from Bristol and I had a tape pack. I think it was like Romeo's birthday bash or something, some random tape that was in my car, and we stuck it on. And the funny thing about that tape was actually Crazy D was on that tape, like hosting a garage set from years back. We were like, is that Crazy D? Then we flipped it over and it was like, I feel like it was Harvey and Romeo or something like that. Can't remember, I think it was Dan the Man DJ, and it was a So Solid tape. And he starts playing Todd, and I was like, do you like Todd Edwards? And he's like, oh. And I'm like, mate, I love Todd Edwards, like it's so sick. And then we're starting to like sing all the Todd Edwards songs to each other, like just like, yeah, Shut the Door, Never Far From You, As I Am. We're just like reeling them off. And I was like, be sick to like try and do like get a Todd grime tune. I think like, I wonder, like we didn't think he was like contactable or reachable anyway. Like we never thought he would be. He was like Todd the God. Like you don't just like send him an email or something like that. But so we got home was like trying to like cut vocals up in that style. And Skepta managed it pretty quickly, like he got like this neo acapella and started like cutting it up.
After man's gonna try and drop some organs in it, but man need a vocal sample still. Your head has to be doing this when you busted them tunes. No, we're on a path now. Shut the door.
Like a barbershop quartet.
Shut the door.
And then started making like a typical kind of like Skepta beat, but like more like a 4 to the floor, a bit like a duppy kind of pattern. And then I started messing about with it, done like my kind of 8-bar pattern. And as we were doing that, JME came home and he's like, we played him what we was doing. He's like, yeah, he ate some food and came in and was like, let me jump in on it. And he jumped in on it, and he's like, JME is different to me as Skepta in that, like, I just think he is like, he's just hardwired, like, technology and him are just like, he just got in and just done what I think we were all thinking we needed to do, but he done it quick. Like, we've just got like the vocal cut ups and that, and he starts putting chords under it and cutting those up, and we're like, sweet. And now it's starting to sound a bit more like a Todd-esque kind of loop. And we all wrote a 16, and then we structured it, and then I went home, and literally like 2 days later, I'm on MSN and JME's sending me all these sketches he's done, near enough finished tracks, and there's like 8 of them, and he's like, I've done like, we were trying to figure out what it was called. We were like, I was like, it's slime, it's like smooth grime, slime, and we were like, no, that's not it. And he was like, we were trying to, it was like, is it like funky something, funky this, funky that? It was like, and I don't even know who came up with the term tropical, but I feel like it was JME. But he had just like gone in, and he'd made so many beats in like the weekend that he had like a mixtape worth of them. And then I'm not sure why he got Cameo to mix it, but he got Cameo to mix it, and yeah, the rest is history. Like, he smashed a whole mixtape out in the space of about 5 days. Like, yeah, that was just how he works. Like, he just got a bug for it. I think he just caught the vibe perfectly, and like that holiday tune on that is nuts. Like, if you listen to that, some of the beats that he made on that mixtape are unreal. Like, yeah, he's a talented guy. Like, you big up JME. So I was in Ibiza with him. I think we were on a gig together. Like, we were out there together. Maybe was it Ibiza Rocks? It can't have been Ibiza Rocks, because we done Ibiza Rocks together. It's hard to remember, but it would have been what, 2014, I think it was, wasn't it? And yeah, we were out there anyway together. We must have been gigging together. We were with his crew. He's doing alright for himself at the time, I remember. It was like starting to kick off for him around that time. So we're in Ocean Beach, and he's paying for everyone's food. It was like eating a nice meal, getting treated like celebrities over there. And he goes, oh yeah, I done a tune with your beat. I went, what beat? And he was like, the Mike Jones one. I was like, oh, sick. And he was like, when you doing radio? So I had like rinse on like Monday or something like that. I was like tomorrow. And he's like, let's do it. I'll bring it. Radio, we'll play it. So I'm like, sweet, let's do it. And he turned up about 2 minutes from the end of the show. So we squeezed about a minute of it in on the radio. And it was like, I'm like, this is sick. Like, it sounded so good. And then he was like, can you get it on SoundCloud? Like, let's just get it up there now. And I was like, he's like, can you do artwork? And I was like, yeah. I was like, give me like your that like car number plate stencil thing that he was using. So it just banged together that artwork, which was like Georgina Cook's picture of us at Forward and that, and yeah, smashed it up on SoundCloud. And I think at the time it was considered for his album, but I think they were concerned about the sample. But the sample was easily clearable because it's actually a sample from William Tell. It's not lifted off of the Mike Jones record at all. I just re-sampled the same sample that they used, and then replayed all the piano bits and stuff. So like, there's interpolation in there, so it's easier to clear than samples. But I think that they were concerned about samples, so it just stayed on SoundCloud, didn't end up on a project. But yeah, it's still like, it goes off, you know, like play that go to like Texas and play that stuff like that. The Americans love that one. It goes down really well out there.
That Still Tippin remix was quite big back in the day.
Yeah.
Skepta also vocaled it with JME.
We did that in Germany, yeah. So we were in Berlin, or was it? Yeah, Berlin. We did this gig for Adidas out there at some like skateboarding thing. It was like me, JME, Tinchy, Skepta, and Fury, and we were out there, and the people that were sort of like running that on the sort of music side was a act called Jacuzzi, who's like a it's like a female rapper, and she had like a production team with her as well. And she was like, "Do you want to go studio tomorrow? We've got studio." So we all woke up a bit hungover. Skept, if you hear that version, Skepta's voice is like gone. It took him a few times to like, he had like the barking cough and that kind of hangover. But yeah, we recorded a couple of takes and that. Then I took it home and kind of layered it all up with the chorus from the Mike Jones version. And yeah, that was probably floating about on the internet. I don't think there was ever like an official release or anything, but it ended up somehow on like LimeWire and all that kind of stuff. It done the rounds, definitely.
What made you decide to remix that song in particular?
I think around the time that we went New York, there was, I don't know if it was a magazine, but it was a CD that I want to say was like on the front of a magazine or something, that was like all the instrumental versions of a lot of hip hop, like Dirty South kind of like hip hop, trappy, like early trap, I guess, chopped and screwed stuff. And some of it was like of the right tempo to play in a grime set. And so through listening to a lot of that stuff, I started downloading loads of like southern rap. And then I heard like Still Tippin, and I'm like, this sounds like 140. So I started playing the original Still Tippin instrumental in my DJ sets. And then I was like, I need to put some like grime underneath that. And that was it. It was really easy to just go like rebuild, make a drum loop, found out where the sample came from, found a clean lift of that without all of the Mike Jones bits and drums underneath it, and just rebuilt it. And again, that was one of them ones. I didn't know how many people were actually playing that until further down the line. Nowadays with the internet, I'm tagged in. I've heard clips of Dizzy on top of it. I've heard D Double on it. I've heard, like your channel's probably put a bunch of clips of that beat. And I didn't know half of them existed until like people like yourself started tagging me on things. I'm like, wow, I never heard this. I didn't realise that many DJs were playing it, but obviously it was a staple in that time. I maybe just wasn't listening to enough of the sets at the time.
So in 2007 your album came out, It's a Differ. What was the process behind making that?
That took ages. I think I made the album itself was finished about a year and a half before it came out, because I remember it would have been the first album that any of like the sort of forward lot had come out with, apart from Horsepower. It would have been before like Skream's first album and stuff like that. It was ready, but I wanted to do it on CD, and I had loads of complications with obviously back then you could just press vinyl when it came out and you didn't have to worry about royalties because they were your royalties. You weren't going to pay yourself royalties, but the way when you pressed the CD and got barcodes and stuff like that done, you had to then go via like MCPS and register with them and pay them royalties for them to then pay me. And I'm like, none of this makes any sense, and it held up the process so much. First thing that held up the process was the artwork. We did the artwork with a graffiti artist called Temper from Birmingham, who was like a really well-known graffiti artist, and we met up with him. Really liked his work. He liked the album, was going to do like an original art. And then he was getting caught up. He was doing some mural for like the Chelsea stadium at the time, and he had loads of massive projects in the works that were like big money, and he couldn't put them off, and so he was kind of putting us off a little bit for a while. And then in the end he was like, kind of came clean, was like, I'm really busy at the minute, I can't find the time to give it the time it needs. And he was like, but I've got some things that are kind of unused, like, is there anything here that feels like a fit? And they've seen the artwork of like the guy with the spray cans kind of coming out of his back, looks like he's kind of jumping over a wall, which felt like the idea of that album, Beg to Differ, was that it was supposed to be like setting myself aside from what everyone else is doing and just being comfortable in my lane. So the guy kind of like jumping over the wall felt a bit like a fit for the idea of like what the album represents, and not sticking to the norm and kind of trying to kind of break out of the norm, a bit like the guy climbing the wall with the graffiti and that, right? So I was like, I like that, can we use that? And he said yeah. So that took months. We got that eventually. Then it was like, right, production. Now we've got all of the art. We need to get manufacturing sorted. And then that got slowed down with royalty, routing, MCPS registration. Took so long. And then, and then eventually it came out like nearly 2 years after we started trying to get it out. But I just wanted, I had so much music back then, it just felt like the right time. Everyone else is doing mixtapes and stuff like that, and I was like, I could do an album. And I had the deal with EMI. Part of that deal was that I need to deliver an album's worth. So if I didn't produce enough tracks for other people's albums, I had to produce my own. So that was another part of it, was that I had a contract to fulfill. So I needed like what they call like 1,000%. So 1,000% would be like 10 tracks that are 100% me, or 50% of like however many tracks. So I'd obviously done bits for Lethal Bizzle's album, did the title track for that, Against All Odds, and bits and bobs here and there for other people's mixtapes and albums that didn't end up going into any major thing. So it's like, even though I'd done the work, I'm not collecting royalties from someone selling a mixtape out of their car boot, you know. So I needed to do that, and the initial idea was that Rephlex would potentially release it, but I think that by the time we got it done, it was maybe not the right fit. I think their idea of a grime album and my idea was a bit different. So it was like, once I had the MCs and that on it, they were like, not sure if, you know, they were doing like the Bug then, but the Bug was like hyper, like hardcore, felt like more Rephlex, you know. But what I was doing was a bit more accessible, you know. And I think, we kind of I could realise quite soon that they weren't maybe that into it, but I was really happy with it and wanted to put it out as it was. And I still, like, now I'm glad I did, because I think it represents what I was doing at that time, like, perfectly. And there's a reason I haven't done like a proper album since, you know, because I don't think I could. I don't produce like I did back then anymore. It's different. But I'm pleased with how it came out.
The biggest song on there is obviously Japan. It's become a bit of a dubstep anthem.
Yeah.
What was the process behind that?
So the Japan one was the inspiration for that was Timbaland. Is it Indian Flute? Is it called Indian Flute? I got my eyes on you. Baby, let me tell you that you are the truth. I think he had a track with Magoo, Timbaland and Magoo. He did an album with Magoo, and I loved it. I was a big Timbaland fan anyway, and he's done this track, and I'm like, could I make a dubstep track like that, using like kind of like Asian centric samples, really kind of like wooden, like percussive beats, not like electronic drum machine claps and stuff like that, right? Which I'd been doing a lot of up to that point. So I flew to Japan for a gig. I think it was 2004 or 5, and literally, like, I think I installed FL on my laptop for that trip. I never have been one to produce on laptops. I hate it. But on the flight home, I started writing drum loops with that in mind. I didn't have the kind of hook sample that I needed at the point, but I was writing drum loops with like tablas and just like wood blocks and stuff like that. I downloaded some percussive like sample packs of like orchestral like instruments and percussion, and I was just going through that, just trying to make rhythms with it. And the drum loop for that song was just saved on my computer as Japan, because I was coming back from Japan. And then when I got home, I was like, I can't make this beat without like a riff. Like, so I'm like, what are like specific like typical Asian instruments? And I'm looking at erhu, and I'm looking at and then I'm looking at like Indian stuff like sitars, and I'm trying to find songs that have those sounds in it. Nothing. I was searching for a week or two. Everything sounded poor. And then by chance I went to my friend's house, and he had Sky movies on in the background, whatever, and it was like the end credits of like House of Flying Daggers, and I was like, what's on TV now? And he's like, oh, House of Flying Daggers. So when I got home, I downloaded the soundtrack and thought there's got to be something in here, and a lot of it was amazing, but it had so much percussion and other stuff, and that was like the one track in there, on the soundtrack that had like a solo, and it was like almost 140. So I was like, if I can downloaded that, put it into, at the time it was like Ableton, to like stretch it a little bit in places, but ultimately it sat on top of the beat quite nicely. I just had to cut a couple of sections out of it to give it some structure, and then I had to just figure out the chords, which is really hard for me because I'm awful when it comes to actual music. I can make drums and beats quite nicely, but chords and that is difficult for me. It took me a lot of like trial and error to get. I should have just downloaded a MIDI file, really, thinking about it, but I spent like a couple of hours just getting those chords in. And then the bass is just like, the bass, one thing I do know about music is the bass is always like a derivative of the chord. So once you've got that kind of main pad, the bass was just like, right, take the sort of bottom end of that pad and replicate it. And then, yeah, I just opened up, what's that bass line? Albino 2, that synth is from. It's like drum and bass hoove or something like that bass. You're going to hear it on loads of people's tunes now. But yeah, one note bass line all the way through it. It made itself, it was probably the quickest tune I've ever finished. Once that sample was there, I probably only spent another hour and a half. The whole tune was done. And yeah, it was saved as Japan. They had a lot of people kind of like telling me, oh, that film's Chinese. That's like, I was like, well, I'm trying to explain that it was saved as Japan. But if we want to get really funny about it, the original composer is Japanese. So, but yeah, a part of me wishes it weren't called that, but I just kept, the name just stayed, and I didn't think about like how that might offend people, or. But yeah, when it came out, some people were like, oh, you do realise this? And I was like, oh, that annoyed me, but it is what it is. That was the reason it was called that.
Back in the early 2010s, Grime's taken a bit of a slump. Dubstep's gone global. It's been exported into America with people like Skrillex. Did you notice a slump in bookings at all, or was there less interest?
In 2010, sort of, so I'd say like, if anything, there was a rocket up the bookings in like 2007 on all the way up to like 12. The slump didn't really happen for me. If anything, it was busier. The grime bookings probably did like peter off a little bit, but because I was so heavily involved with all that was going on in that dubstep movement, as much as I probably wasn't representing the harder end of it when I was playing in America on those lineups, but I could tell that I wasn't connecting with the audience quite as much, and there was only a certain amount of hard that I wanted to go. Didn't feel that comfortable going beyond it. And then so I'd say like around 2011-12, when I guess like the Skrillex moment happened in America, everything got so hard, and I could never produce that hard. It was not in my arsenal at all. But also selection wise, it wasn't me. Didn't feel, I could play hard stuff, but I didn't want to play a whole hour of it, you know. Whereas over there, what I was playing was almost like they were kind of looking at me like, when are you going to play hard? And I'm like, I'm pushing it. But I would say that my like peak of like my bookings in my career was probably like 2009 to 2011. That couple of years, it was like, you know, 3 or 4 times a week, and in countries all over the world, packed everywhere. I never had to think about ticket sales. I don't. Now I think like it's mad. Now it's like you feel that pressure of like you really need to help the promoter. Make sure you're promoting like everything you're doing. Obviously, I think Instagram was less prominent back then as well, so that was a big part of it. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot we could do to promote the night. It was kind of on the promoter, so it felt like we were cruising a little bit. Like every gig's packed. You know, you're playing in some venues that are over 4,000 people in them. It's sold out on like a Wednesday and stuff. And yeah, you're in Chicago selling out like theaters that Snoop Dogg's playing in tomorrow and stuff. It was nuts. And yeah, so I'd say like definitely didn't see or feel that pinch. It wasn't until I think the first slump that I really felt was like 2013. So I think at the tail end of 2012, I kind of made a decision quietly to myself that I was going to need to broaden what I'm playing a bit, because the dubstep that people want to hear is not what I want to play, and people seem to have got bored of grime. The grime that I'm playing is almost like not relevant to anyone anymore. So I'm like, I either have to play really hard dubstep or I have to figure out something else to do. So that was when like I was really getting interested in like the LA beat scene, and like Team Supreme and Low End Theory and all that kind of stuff, like Flying Lotus and all that was going on there. Hudson Mohawk over here obviously was kind of like intertwined in it from the UK perspective, but I was like, yeah, I really like that sound and I feel like it fits in with what I'm playing. Maybe that's what I want to kind of like dive into a bit more. So the beginning of 2013, I decided I would go and live in America for a bit and try, like my wife and I moved out there. We lived in LA and to see like what would the difference be, because I think 2013, it felt like, right, this is a good time to do it. Went out there, did my Rinse show out there every Monday. We had loads of big guests through people like Kenny Beats, like Gordo now, you know, like he was like DJ Carnage back then, and Kenny Beats was part of Loud Pack, which was like the beginning of like the trap sound in America. Skrillex was on the show. We had loads of massive guests, but it was really eclectic, different styles. And G at Rinse was feeding back to me, he was like, you're killing it out there, like when you get back we want to keep you should keep doing this, like keep bringing these guests in, keep your show very eclectic. Like the numbers were like massive on Rinse, like we could see the stats were like by far the biggest show on the station at the time. And so when I came back in March, I felt really good, like we did a good thing, we did good gigs out there. I was busy nearly every weekend in America flying around. So I came back thinking, right, we'll hit the ground running, we'll carry this on with Rinse, I'll continue to represent more broader style of electronic music on the show. And when I got back to the UK, it was almost like no one knew what to do with me. It's like, if we book you, what are you going to do? And it's like, trust me, just trust me that I'll get it, you know, I'll figure it out. But at the same time, that coincided with, I guess, we had the disclosure moment and like, whoa, everyone's into that now. So everything that was bass music kind of became a bit of a dirty word, specifically dubstep. There was all those headlines in the press like Skream saying I'm not doing dubstep anymore, all that kind of stuff happened. So dubstep became a bit of a dirty word when I came back, and because I was so heavily involved in it, like on the way, like being on the way up, kind of like holding on the coattails and like getting all the way up, I had to ride it on the way back down as well, because I was so heavily attached to it. When that became a dirty word, my name kind of like was tarred with it as well. So myself and a lot of the dubstep artists will tell you that 2013 was like, what we can do. It went from playing out 2-3 nights a week to once or twice every couple of months. It was like really hard. So that was tough. But I kind of stuck to what I was doing, decided that I was going to keep playing all these different sounds on the radio. And then this sort of like wave sound started to kind of emerge from my sets. A lot of producers that were listening to the show were trying to do that, a bit like how we were trying to make tunes for Hatcher's show when we were young. They were trying to get stuff played on my show. So people that were making trap or making dubstep were trying to make this wave, which was kind of like very chilled trap, almost like Burial having a go at a trap beat. And that seemed to kind of strike a chord with a lot of people. And where I was getting a lot of support on SoundCloud with the show, any producer who was getting played was like reposting it. And these producers are starting to get big, like artists like Muramassa's SoundCloud page for about a year was just radio clips of my show. He wouldn't put his clean tracks on his SoundCloud. Obviously I tried to sign him, didn't work out, he got signed. But yeah, like that's an example, you know, like the SoundCloud kind of beat scene really embraced my show, and it was a bit like became like a kind of focal point for a lot of like the emerging artists, you know, like so people like even like channels like Soulection. I had Soulection on as a guest on my show back then, before anyone knew who they were, and obviously they're doing big things now. But there was loads of guests that kind of came on, done a mix in that era. So even though I felt it hurt my bookings, the stats were telling me that my show is healthier than it's ever been. I felt important to people as much as I didn't feel important in the UK to anyone. I felt like I had to stick with it, so I did. But that 2013 to sort of, I want to say 2013 to 14, because I think when grime kind of had its sort of 2.0, I was involved with it enough still that there weren't many people that were, you know. So when it did come back round, you had like the grime 2.0 that people like Slack and Mum Dance and all that lot were doing. But I was still on the peripheral of that because I was playing people like Missing No on the show and Mum Dance as well. And, you know, obviously was still working with Skepta when he came back through. I was making beats for him still. So when that came back, it kind of gave me a little bit of a boost back in the bookings. When people started booking grime again, I was one of the DJs that got booked for that. So that came back on again, and then I feel like the industry is very different now to what it was when we had the peaks in like the early 2010s and that anyway. So I think it'd be hard for me to get back to that place unless I became like a prolific producer. I think now, in the age of TikTok and all that, I think first you have to be quite interesting visually at what you're doing, and you know, I'm in my 40s now. You can only be the young up and comer once, so I don't have that. But yeah, production is massive, and at the minute, you know, it's like bootlegs and stuff, and I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to do that, you know. So I'm quite accepting of it now. I think as I've got older, I accept I'm in my lane, and yeah, I'm still here, and I still have a career out of it. So yeah, you do experience those dips and troughs, but I'd say 2013 was the worst of it for me.
Was that after you were touring with Magnetic Man?
So the Magnetic, so it was the Skream and Benga tour in America. That was 2012. That was massive. That was still like, that was probably like peak. That was peak probably. And then after that, the following sort of 2013 January to March was when like you started to notice the bookers were like stopping bass music, and they were just trying to get tech house, anything that sounded a bit like Disclosure. Bass music was taking a bit of a backseat for a little while, but I think post-COVID it's kind of gone back the other way. I think bass music's a lot more broad and exciting to people now, so we're kind of in a better spot, just less venues, unfortunately.
What was it like touring with Skream and Benga?
Amazing. It was like 3 weeks on a bus. So the tour was Sergeant Pokes, Skream, Benga, myself, Jackmaster, and Skream's brother Hijack, tour manager Toby, and our agent Carter. And we lived on a bus together. We had a driver, drove this old bus, and it was amazing because all the gigs were like packed, and we're just getting into these cities, having a bit of lunch. They're loading out all of the kit. They've got like people that do that. So we're just chilling out for a few hours, having a bit to eat. And then the shows start quite early out there. So like the shows all open up at like 8, 9 in the evening. And before you know it, you're back at it again, drinking the rider. Me and Jackmaster and Hijack would usually play the early slots. So my work was normally done by about 10 at night, every night. So I just got to enjoy all the other DJs playing. Skream and Benga obviously closing the night out. They just tore it every night, absolutely caning it. You know, crowd surfing. I can't tell you how many times I did a crowd surf on that tour. Like, there's some good videos of it. But yeah, we sold out some massive venues, and then like we was in Chicago, and the tour bus exploded on the night. We played the biggest gig of the tour. It was I think it's called Congress Theatre, I might be wrong, but it was a 4,000 cap, and we shared the billing with Feed Me. So it was a massive ticketed event. But essentially Feed Me was just going to play at the end of like what we did. So it was set up for like the regular kind of Skream and Benga tour, and then Feed Me was gonna, they would do like a stage change because he had this big like stage setup that he had. So even for Skream and Benga, they got a little bit of a night off at the end of that night. So we've done the show, and even during Skream and Benga's, I think me, Jackmaster, and Pokes and Hijack were on the tour bus out the back. We took our rider out of the backstage area because it was a bit dry there. We went into the tour bus and we just plugged the laptop in, and we were like, as we did most nights, just like having a sound clash against each other. Usually me and Jackmaster trying to outdo each other on like 80s bangers. And we was playing 80s tunes. Skream and Benga got on the bus and we're all just like losing our minds. Feed Me's backstage have come out because they could like come out for a cigarette or whatever and heard all the noise coming off our bus. So we had all of his mates on our bus as well. We were having the time of our life, and then Jackmaster's played Tiny Dancer by Elton John. And I remember it clear as day. Our agents ran on the bus. He's like, the bus is on fire. And we thought he meant like it's going off. And we were like, yeah, it's having it. And then Pokes has poked his head and he's like, no, the bus is actually on fire. There's smoke coming out of it. And then Carter's like, I think Carter had been in some kind of accident with a bus that caught on fire before. So he was panicking. He was like, don't pick any up. Don't get your shit. Just get off the bus. Everyone needs to get off now. Like now, come on, everyone, go, 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 go. So within about 2 minutes, we're all off the bus. But none of us were like that worried about it. It didn't smell of smoke or anything like that. When we got off, we walked around the back and there was smoke coming out of the back of the bus, and the guy that drives the bus was losing his shit. He was blaming it on us. The fire department's turned up, and then the club is like emptied out, and they're just seeing all these fire engines everywhere, and we're just there like holding like bottles of wine and that, like laughing at like imagine we're going to be able to tell everyone that our tour bus exploded or whatever. Like it's quite juvenile, but we were like loving the fact that we're going to have this story to tell, and here I am telling it like over 10 years later. But it was like one of them things where you're like, fucking hell, like people think this tour's been mad, and now our tour bus is going to like blow up. But it didn't explode into a ball of flames, but it was on fire. The fire brigade put it out. It turns out it wasn't our fault. What happened, the driver, there's like a generator on the side of the bus that when it's parked, so all the electrics can run on it, so you can, like your fridge and everything still works on it. And he'd left a towel in there, and the towel had caught fire because it overheated. So we weren't actually like liable for the damn, like it was his problem, his fault. But it meant that our tour bus was like, it was a write-off. So we were supposed to take the bus the next day to Kansas City from Chicago, and because of that we couldn't. So the next morning, Toby, the tour manager, he booked us flights to Denver, which was the next stop. It's like, we can't make it to Kansas, but we can get to the Denver show, which is the last show on the tour. So he hired a stretch limo, and we were all so drunk. We got in this stretch limo in the morning, hanging. I don't know if any of us had really been to sleep. And we got the stretch limo to drive through McDonald's, and all these people are like looking at us, and Benga's like poking his head out the stretch limo, like shouting orders at the like McDonald's and that. And we got to the airport, and I've never seen casualties like it. We were stuck there for a few hours because we had a delay, and obviously our flight went till later, but all we could do was get there. And I felt like we were at that airport for like 4 hours just dying. Got to Denver and had a night off, so thought we'd go and have something to eat. Went into Denver, went to this barbecue restaurant. Me, Jackmaster, Skream, and Toby, the tour manager. Pokes and Hijack stayed at a hotel. And I think they were a bit pissed off with us actually, because we racked up like an $800 bill at this barbecue restaurant drinking cocktails, and came back thinking we were like Jack the lads. Like, oh, went out for a quiet one. Look who's back. Look how pissed we are. But Jack and Pokes were more drunk than us. They had stayed in the room, went across the road to the Irish bar, bought a bottle of gin, put it in a kettle, and had been boiling gin in the room and inhaling fumes from the kettle. There's this incredible photo of Sergeant Pokes' head up against the wall, and his dreads are like going up the wall where he's like slid down it. It looks like The Exorcist or something. It's nuts, but it kind of sums up the state we found him in. So yeah, then we ended up out. We went out for the night. Went to the promoter who had us, Nicole. She had like another night on, and we went down there. And yeah, we didn't have a quiet night. So then the last night was legendary as well. As pictures of it. Big stage invasion, like at the end of the set. Yeah, it was amazing. That tour, still, I think it'll be. I don't think our bodies could handle that anymore anyway. But that was as close to understanding what like a rock star felt like as I think anyone that did what we did at that time could have experienced. And I think, it says a lot when even Skream will talk about that as excitedly as I will. I think we all just we burnt the candle very much at every which end on that tour. It was something else.
Unfortunately, we lost Jackmaster recently. Do you remember the first time you both met?
I was trying to think of this the other day, but the first time I met him, I don't remember exactly where it was, but I know Ollie had met him a few times, and he said "Oh, have you ever heard this DJ? He's sick." And I was like, "I've seen his name, I've not listened to him." He's like, "Trust me, you'll be in. You need to listen to his mixes and that." So I must have heard a couple of his mixes, and he was playing all sorts of stuff, but he was playing grime, playing disco, techno. I'm like, wow. I think the closest thing I'd heard to at that point was One Man. It's quite similar, but not quite as broad as what Jack was doing. And then I feel like I met him. I'm 90% sure the first time I met him was in Miami at Winter Music Conference. Might have even been before that tour, because that tour was off the back of South by Southwest Winter Music Conference, and then because they had started it before, I think they'd done a few shows in Toronto and somewhere else, and then they went to South by, and I met up with them all in South by. So I think I met him at South by, that's right, because I did a show with him and Skream. We did a show in Austin at Barcelona Bar, and that was messy as well. I mean, that South by was always a mess. So I thought I got on really well with him. I liked him. I thought he was just one of those fun people. So I knew instantly that we would get on. And then when we were in Miami, I think Skream and Benga had big ultra gig they had to do, and we lost Skream for a bit. So me and Jack were hanging out, just trying to figure out how to find everyone else. And our agent called us and was like, "Do you know where Skream is?" And we're like, "No." And he goes, "Someone's told me he is in the hotel. We think he might be last people to see him was Annie Mac." And then they were up with Jake Shears. Which room's Jake Shears from Scissor Sisters in? And I'm we think he's across from where we're staying. And he's like, "You need to bang his door down." And I'm banging Jake Shears' door down. And he's like, "You have to do it because they're going to lose this gig. If you don't get them to the gig, you're my last hope." So me and Jack have literally banging this door down, and Ollie's "Oh, answer the door." He just looked straight through us. He was like, we're like, "Mate, we need to get you to ultra now. Your Magnetic Man sets in about 45 minutes. And yeah, we got in there, and him, Benga, and Artwork were just on another planet on that gig. Yeah. We got him there, but yeah, I bonded with Jack on that trip, and then obviously we did the tour, and we were in the same boat where we were kind of warming up. So there was a couple of nights I was like, I'll play first, you play second, Toronto, give him a better set time. And yeah, we just we had a similar taste in music outside of what people might have thought I was playing, especially. But the after parties in the bus and that were we were just trying to outdo each other on the 80s stuff. And yeah, he was just he was a good time guy.
Do you have any personal favourite memories?
I think that trip especially, I was trying to think of it the other day, right? There was a moment after one of the gigs, I can't remember where it was, but he was in a kebab shop somewhere and he had the whole place in stitches. He, in his thick Scottish accent, was singing some song and trying to get everyone in the kebab shop to join in. They couldn't understand him. And I just remember coming into like the back end of it and the whole place was like in fits of laughter, and I felt like I'd just missed out on something special. And I kind of caught the tail end of it, and I remember it being really funny, but I felt gutted that I'd missed out on it. But that was just him. Like, there's been some great videos of him like this week. It's been quite comforting actually, like with all the bad stuff, just seeing everyone's like good memories of him. So yeah, he'll be missed.
Personal favourite tune of mine from you is Dreading. What was the process behind that? Because it feels like a bit of a full circle moment with the dark garage stuff.
Yeah. Dreading, so Sam, who runs Good For Ya, had like hit me up about maybe doing an EP for the label, and I was like, yeah, like I'd be down for that, but I did say like I'm slow when it comes to working studio, you might be waiting a while for it, and he was quite on me for it. So I'd done a few sketches, and Dreading was like one of those tunes that the sample carried it quite nicely. Once I had manipulated that sound into that kind of arpeggiated riff, I was like, I can just roll a beat and bass under this and it'll work. It doesn't need to be too overthought. In my head I had the drum pattern from The Way You Make Me Feel, Urban Myths was like in my head, that drum pattern. I'm like, I need that rolling drum, just keep it rolling. We'll put that pad in there, put that riff in there. We'll put a few minor bits in, we'll just get like a re-space underneath it and just like make it like driving. So that tune, by my standards, come together quite quickly. Probably finished it in like a couple of days. Put it to one side, trying to make some other bits. Sent Sam a folder of about 4 tracks, Dreading, and about 3 tracks that are all like a minute and a half long each. And I just said, tell me which ones you want me to finish. And he went, I like that one. But he was like, I don't want any vocals on anything. And I was like, but if I take the vocal bit, little vocal stabs, like, yeah, like things like that. He's like, I don't like that. And I'm like, if I take that out, it's going to sound pants. So I'm like, I don't know what to give you. If I take that out of the tune, it's going to sound like it's missing something. And I don't think putting like a stab of a chord in there is going to have the same vibe. So I was being a bit stubborn, I suppose, but I was a bit like, I was really busy at the time as well, and I'm like, I don't know, I can probably finish 1 or 2 of these, but I don't know when I'm going to find time to start again. And given like the feedback, I was like, he's probably not going to like much of what I send back. So I've been there before with like remix work where I'll spend 2 weeks doing something and then they just go nope, and I'm like, great, I've wasted 2 weeks of my life. But yeah, he liked Dreading, and I said to him, okay, why don't you just take Dreading and we get remix done of it? So he said, if I get LB to do remix, would you do one for him in return at some point? And I was like, yeah. But Lou was having trouble getting like his stems out for any of the tracks that I was like keen on. So it just kind of dragged on a bit, and he was like, do you know what? We're happy with the release. And I was like, sweet. And honestly, I really liked the track, but I didn't think anyone else would. So I was really surprised how well it done when it came out, and still does now. Yeah, I think it's like my 3rd most listened to track on Spotify and streaming, and I get people coming up to me to sign that record quite a lot and stuff. Like it's got about like, so yeah, I was super happy with how that was received. And yeah, like it takes a lot for me to play my own records in my sets, but I play that one out quite a lot. Like it's nice to play it on a big system and see, because it's a rumbler, it's not like a big punchy bass, but it's one of the first tunes in years that's found its way into outside of like my own circuit. Someone tagged me in some pictures of or videos of a DJ playing it at Junction 2 festival. I can't remember who it was now, but it was like a techno DJ playing it, and it was going off, and I was like, wow. But yeah, I would like, if anyone hears this and knows who that was and has the footage, I'd like to have it so I can see it again. It was like on a story, so it disappeared, and I didn't get a chance to like record it. to see it back. But yeah, it's nice when your stuff kind of crosses out of your comfort zone, so to speak, in terms of like the DJs that support it.
Do you have a personal favourite production?
God. Do you know what? I think one of my favourites is a E-Night Revisited, which I did. I think I did it just before lockdown. It eventually came out in like 21. But this was like before people started playing garage and stuff again, right? And this artist Duce is like a wave artist, but his stuff's like heavily trance inspired. And I remember being in the car and this track E-Night comes on by Duce, and it's really slow, but it's like half time, like 100 BPM, really heavy trance pads all the way through it. But I really liked the trance pad. I was like, I'm hearing like garage under that for some reason. And I talked him into sending me the stems and said like, can I like remix it or like, you know, like remake it? I've got an idea for it. So I stripped it to pieces, made it less trancey, but used the trance riff as like the second drop. And again, the reason that took so long to come out was like, no one's playing this. Who's going to play trancey garage? Like, no one was even playing garage when I made that. It wasn't really doing anything. But then it started to pick up a little bit, and I was like, you know, maybe it will sneak its way in. Eventually I thought, sod it, man, let's just put it out. And then that done really well. Like, ended up in, it was like Odessa did like, they got nominated for a Grammy, and then did like a playlist of stuff that had influenced their album, and that track was in there. And I'm like, wow, like, it's reached people somehow. But I've never heard anyone play it out. But I play it out, and it's so weird, such a strange record, that I'm just happy I can play it out somehow. So I think because of that, it sticks out in my head as like an unobvious kind of success, whereas other tracks I'm like expecting them to go off, or you know, or they've done their bit, you know, like Intensive Snare in Japan, obviously like really big ones that people always know. But as a DJ, when I'm playing, I think it's like having those unexpected tracks that go off is way more exciting when it happens than playing like the banger that you know is going to go off. You know, like for me, like grime DJs playing rhythm and gash feels like, come on mate, you can do better than that. So yeah, that's one of them where it's like, me playing Japan is a bit of a home run, like easy. I could play that every set and it will get a reaction, but it won't be fulfilling to me as the DJ playing that, knowing that it's a bit cheap. It's a bit of a cheap, easy. It's like a sugary drink that you probably shouldn't be drinking. You know, and I think like going back to Jackmaster, that was another thing that was always great about him, was that he always seemed to have the dance floor in the palm of his hands, but he might play no tracks that you've ever heard before. Somehow just figures out the groove or the vibe, and I love that about DJing. And when I'm doing it, that's the most fulfilling thing for me, is like if you can play like a new track or something that no one's heard before, but it has that impact. And I think that comes from Forward, because that was what Forward was. Everyone wanted to hear the new dubs. You weren't there to hear the classics, the hits. There were none. You went there to hear the DJs that you knew had access to those producers, to hear what you haven't heard yet. And I think that's still, well, that will always be in me when I'm playing out. And I think that's why I like the less obvious bits.
As someone who's maintained a career for like so many years across so many genres, are you happy with what you've achieved in that time? And is there anything next?
I think you always want more. Like, I feel like when I think of like what I've achieved, I feel like I've underachieved still. I don't think I set out to do quite what I thought I might be able to, and I think part of that's down to maybe just losing the studio bug a little bit. I'm not someone who particularly enjoys being at the buttons all day making beats. If I was, I think I'd probably be in a better place, because I could figure out the tunes that would get me to that next step as a DJ. But yeah, I think I'd love to find that again. Like, I don't know if that comes when my kids get older and I'm like, I've got the time again. But I think being a parent, you know, a lot of your time and energy goes into your kids, and that at the end of the day, when you turn a computer on, you're probably not going to get the best out of me when I've barely slept and I've been football training and I've put the kids to bed and stuff like that. So maybe, who knows, like there might be like a second wind that comes production wise when I'm a bit older. But yeah, I'm always excited to try and push forwards, push boundaries, always keen for anything that sounds new and exciting, and hopefully I'll be involved in the evolution of more genres to come. Fingers crossed.
Would you have any advice to producers or DJs working today that may look up to you?
I would say for me, the thing that worked for me always was when I'm producing for yourself first. So if you're a DJ who's getting into production, I'd say you figure out the tracks in your set that you really like, and like make the song that mixes between two of the tracks you really like. Like, how do you get from that track to that track? What's the middle? Make that track for yourself, and then hopefully other people will make use of it as well. So that for like people who, but I think a lot of kids now probably get into it the other way around. They're producers who then learn how to DJ, and for those people I always say, when you're producing, don't go on Spotify and listen to like what everyone else is doing or what's hot or what's got the hits. Go listen to DJ mixes and figure out where your music can fit in. If you want a DJ, you want that support, you want a DJ to play your music, listen to their mixes, don't listen to like their productions or the productions in like the big playlists or whatever. Like, those playlists are fed by the tastemaker DJs. That's the support you want first. So aim with your productions for like those DJ sets rather than the playlists. That will come after. If you get in those DJ sets, you'll find your own playlists anyway.